Welcome, everybody, to our informal session here, our workshop. And at this point, I would like to read a call for a special session. Honorable members of City Council, in accordance with the Virginia Beach Code 2-21, Virginia Beach Code 15.2-1413, and the city's continuity of government ordinance adopted on September 15, 2020, and Chapter 1289 of the 2020 Acts of Assembly as amended, and by the authority vested in me as mayor of the city of Virginia Beach, I hereby call for a special meeting by electronic means for the Virginia Beach City Council on Tuesday, February 23rd, 2021 at 3:30. This special meeting by electronic means will be held virtually with the City Council members participating via video audio conference. The purpose of the special meeting is to allow the City Council to hold a regularly scheduled workshop regarding the items listed in the published agenda. The City Council meeting will be streamed live on www.vbgov.com and Facebook Live, and will be recorded for rebroadcast on cable TV. Bobby Dyer, Mayor, okay? And at this point, Madam Clerk, could we have the roll call?
Councilmember Abbott.
Aye.
Councilmember Berlucci.
Present.
Councilmember Henley.
Present.
Councilmember Jones advised he would be absent today. Councilmember Moss.
Present.
Councilmember Rouse also advised that he would be absent today. Councilmember Tower.
Aye.
Councilmember Wilson.
Here.
Councilmember Wooten.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Wood.
Present.
Mayor Dyer.
Present.
All present excluding Councilmember Jones and Councilmember Rouse.
Okay, at this point, Madam Clerk, Amanda Barnes, please provide meeting structure and instructions.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, Mayor and members of City Council. This is the City Clerk, Amanda Barnes. Today's meeting is being conducted electronically and is allowed as described by Mayor Dyer during his reading of the call for special session. Also, please note this meeting is being recorded. To ensure this live electronic event is successful, please note the following meeting instructions must be followed. Speakers, presenters, please mute any additional devices you have in the room to avoid any unnecessary background noise and/or the possibility of echoing or reverberation. It is important that once recognized, please wait 2 to 3 seconds to begin to ensure council hears your complete remarks. Please begin your comments by identifying yourself. Also, do not ask, "Can you hear me?" as only one feed is open at a time to minimize the echo, and as such, you will be unable to hear a response. At the conclusion of each presentation, the mayor will open the floor for questions and comments. Council members will be recognized in the order which they raise their virtual hand. It is important that council members hold their comments until recognized. Also, council members, it's helpful if you would ask all questions and end by stating that you would stand by for answers. This helps to ensure all questions are answered before I move to the next council member. Lastly, please lower your virtual hand at the conclusion of your remarks. Mayor and members of council, are there any questions about the process? If so, raise your virtual hand. Seeing none raised, Mayor, I will turn the meeting back over to you.
Thank you. And is the tax assessor on the line?
So we have him as an attendee. You will not be able to see Mr. Agnor, but you should be able to hear him.
Okay,
So we can unmute him and he can begin his presentation.
that would be great. Thank you.
If you would like to go ahead and begin, thank you. You're unmuted.
Red, but can you hear me, Amanda?
Mr. Agnor, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, Kevin, thank you.
You got it.
Well, that's as close as I like to have them. Okay. Mr. Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, members of council, thank you today for allowing me to come in and give you a very short, brief presentation on the FY22 projected assessment for the land book coming up this summer. First thing I'd like to say to the mayor, the vice mayor, and members of council is, besides thank you for letting me for this time, but I really would like to just take a second and thank our staff for going through this year. I know everyone's had to go through this year, but I just wouldn't feel right if I didn't get a chance to say something to these people, because not only have they done an extra 1,000 transfers, but we had to relook at the market this year because it's moving so fast, and I'll explain some of that as I go through this. But the people that I work with, this report and this assessment would absolutely not be possible without them, and I just want to thank them. Okay, next slide, please. The detailed booklet that I sent in your package has a lot of information on it. I'm just going to go over some of the salient points I think that really tell us where we're at, and maybe for the short term out where we're going. But our assessments are now at $63.745 billion. And the revenue on that is almost 650 million per year. And each penny, and that's at the current tax rate of 1.0175. And each penny of that tax rate generates $6,375,000. Next slide, please. Total taxable parcels in the city are at 158,902 parcels. We're also responsible for 3,778 exempt parcels, for a grand total right now of 162,679 parcels. The ownership transfers for the calendar year 2020 were 16,062. That's about 1,000 more than normal, so more transfers. Subdivision plats 309, and then corrections, which are things that we have to do to deeds that come in from different people or our own, is 351. Next slide, please. Growth and appreciation, trying to separate what the market's doing to what's already there with what we're building to grow. And we're about in the same place that we've been. The allocation between commercial and residential, as you see, will be a little bit different, but we're about the same place, except our total assessment projection to get to land book is 3.7%, and the growth is 0.8%, and the appreciation is 0.9%. Next slide, please. The average appreciation of all properties is 4.46 on the median, and I'm sorry, the average, the mean is 4.83, the median is 4.46, with residential's median coming in at 4.59%, apartments at 7.7, and commercial at almost flat at 0.07. And this is the actual appreciation through January 2021, so we can get to the most current information that we have here. Next slide, please. So our change is up. From 2021 fiscal year was, as you can see, quite a bit lower on the median, 2.05, now 4.46. There's a reason for that, and that is what's appreciating at the highest amounts in the inventory of the city are the lower price housing, and I'll hit that in just a minute. Next slide, please. So just of all residences, the median assessment is $267,600 all the way down at the bottom. And that's a 5.3% increase. And this is based off dollars. What we were just talking about was percentages when you array all the changes in a row. These are dollars, actual change in dollars, 5.3%. Single family, 5.5. Townhouse, 6.2. Low-rise condos, 5.1. High-rise condos, co-ops, 5.8. And then the duplex, which is more of an anomaly because most of those get turned into something like a condo, but those and the homes with apartments are up kind of at 11.4, but a very small inventory of that compared to everything else. Next slide, please. It does show a trend, though, in the median home assessment. Easily now, I can see a trend. It's easy to see from that graph that we've got a trend in that median going up. So, next slide, please. The allocation between the commercial and the residential, again, I'll talk about it in just a second, very briefly, but it's about the same. I mean, it's 15.8% of commercial and 84.2% of residential. We throw the apartments in that for the purposes of this report. And last year it was 16.8 in the commercial and 83.2. So it just stays right in there. It doesn't move very much. Next slide, please. Those are taxable parcels too, by the way. This slide now shows a breakdown of each one of the residential and the commercial sectors, categories that we use. And as you can see, in the new construction part of the breakdown, that it's kind of flipped a little bit. Residential is 71.2% of the new construction, and commercial is 28.8%. So the real new construction is coming in from the residential, and the commercial is just basically what was there. There are some new things going up, of course. I'm sure you've noticed, but in the dollars, $145 million in new construction versus almost $360 million in residential new construction. It's a big difference when you look at the total new construction of 503,746. The 503,746 is a little bit up from the previous year, so it's a number that we've been dealing with, up and down for the last few years. Next slide, please. The number of units built in the new construction section of this is 603 apartment units, 617 homes, 1,233 total units. That's kind of normal that we see homes, at least lately in the last 5 years or so, where the homes and the apartment units are very close to one another. It's housing. So the apartments are still going up. They're still buying apartments right now. And they are still trying to get them in the ground. And you can see the trend at the bottom. It's been very erratic in the past, so we'll see where it goes. Next slide, please. And this is your average assessment, a median and a mean of a new home. 387.7 and 524.5 on the mean. As you can see, that's down just a little bit, and that's because that's the market that they're targeting. As far as the new development, that's the market where they sell immediately as soon as they put them up. The lower price housing is definitely appreciating at a faster rate than the higher priced housing. Next slide, please. And here we go. When we're at under 200, virtually nothing, and 10% if we stay under 250, and those are going to be very small townhouses and condos. And then we start to pick up at the 250 to 350, and most of those are your low-rise condos and some townhouses. But you don't see a lot of townhouses actually put up. They're townhouse condominiums. And then we get into the 350 to 500, another 22% or 23.2%. So both figures are down, and they're just trying to, they're meeting the demands of who's out there with the terms of the market as we see it right now. Next slide, please. Can you go back one slide? I'm sorry. Thank you. Down at the bottom, it says 44.1% is below $350,000. 55.9 is above $350,000. How that compares to last year, 2/3 of the new construction was below 500,000 and 1/3 was above. So it is allocating differently based on price range and type of housing. Next slide, please. 2 slides, I guess. One more. Okay. These are just our special service districts. Wait a minute. I think we skipped a slide. We go back one. Okay, I'm sorry. There's a bar across where it says what the title of the slide is. I'm sorry. The change in land, $57,961,900. Down a little bit, but it's been coming down for a while. Then it's took a, as you can tell by the chart below it, it took a creep up, and now it's going back down. I can't really see a trend in what's going on there, but I do know it's harder to develop land now. And we all know that the flooding is part of that, but it's also hard to get money on land, but you can get it on other things when you're developing. So we'll see what happens in the future, because that could spike up at any time. It wouldn't surprise me if we can get out of this situation we're in with the COVID virus. Okay, next slide. The districts that we maintain, Sandbridge, of course, just went to an SSD, is at $1.38 billion right now. The Central Business District at town is 1.03 billion, and that's in the TIF. And then just in the TIF/SSD is 514.7 million. Next slide. The neighborhood dredgings, they all went up. I mean, you can see Old Donation 39.4. I won't call out all those numbers right now for the sake of time, but they all went up with the exception of Chesapeake Colony and Harbor Point, and that just reflects on the waterfront ones. So, and they didn't really go down; they just more or less stayed about the same, or maybe a tad lower. And no new entries into the dredging program this year. Shilling Point was the last one that we put on the books. Next slide, please. The Virginia Landmarks Registry, there have been no changes in that. That is the exact same parcels that were on it last year. However, the taxes reduced them a bit, changes, and that's $106,158 there at the top bar. Next slide. Same thing with the Virginia Beach Historic Rehabilitation. We've had those 3 parcels in there for several years now, and there's been no change in that. It cost $35,300, so none were added. But we did have 2 for the first time. We did have 2 go into the Vibe District. Now, Vibe District is a little bit different, that it's only good for 10 years instead of the 15. But we had 510 18th Street and 505 18th Street kind of back up to when we're in there, and both of them are brand new. The parcel tax reduction for the credit of the rehab is costing $5,216. Next slide, please. Energy efficiency, they go up. They're the fastest growing program, as I say, every year. Went up from $452,000 in tax reductions to $557,089. That's a 23% increase. And the number of parcels that entered it went from 126 to 178 parcels. That does not expire at any time, like the rehab credits. Next slide, please. Land use. Land use has also remained fairly static. 912 parcels in the program, with 21% of the city's acreage. And the agriculture and the forest and the open space and the swamp and the marsh acreages are detailed there for a total of 33,046 acres. And this isn't a tax reduction or exemption. Of course, it's just deferred tax that the city will get, and it's deferred right now at $2,741,908. Next slide, please, because the rollback is also not very active, really. We had 38 acres rolled back last year, and the rollback taxes for $23,810. Next slide, please. Even though the Commissioner of Revenue does these programs, we're responsible for building the land book. We build the land book. We have to create these reports and these taxes. We generate all these, so we do include them for you in this report. The tax exemption for the seniors and disableds are at a tax reduction of a little over $10 million. The disabled veterans down below that, a little over almost $9 million. The spouses of KIAs, 14 participants in that, $48,000. The Line of Duty Act, a little more than $5,600 for a total of $8.9 million on that. And that is the end of the presentation. What I'd like to wrap up real quick and just let you ask whatever questions that you're interested in. What I get out of this every year by doing this report, we prepare this report in-house with my people that are the data miners, and then of course have somebody that makes the thing look pretty, the big one. But I do this in the middle myself because it really gives me a feeling for what's happening in a large market compared to other large markets and compared to other property types. So I think it's clear if you've looked at this report yet with any times you've had, that residential is appreciating higher than commercial. And I don't think that's any surprise. It's not for me. Residential has more new construction than commercial in dollars. The lower end of the residential is appreciating faster than the higher end of residential. That's been true now for a while. But residential is very strong. And if anybody would have told me this is where we'd be last March, I wouldn't have. I've been very skeptical of it. But I won't say it's on fire, although a lot of people do use that term. I would say it's very strong. I would say that there are very few listings. And when the listings come up, if they're anywhere near a fair price, they're going to sell, and they're going to sell fast. We're not seeing the kind of appreciation that we saw back before the financial crisis, but we're still seeing a very strong market. And the lower price housing, of course, is doing better than the higher priced housing on a percentage. So commercial, commercial is kind of like it's on hold almost. The players in the market, especially the investors, not the guy that owns a building because he operates his business out of it, but for the investors especially, after speaking to them and looking at their actions, they don't want to get rid of their properties right now. They would rather make some type of an arrangement with an existing tenant than go look for a new one or try to go sell something in a time that's uncertain what's going on with commercials. But they're not all doing bad. I mean, in that report, it details that industrial is doing very well, and that makes sense with wholesale distribution and manufacturing and so forth. I mean, industrial is up higher than it usually is. We're not seeing a fall in the shopping centers yet, but I anticipate that we probably will due to the restaurants. The ones that are hurting the most are absolutely, I'm sure this isn't any surprise to anyone, is the hospitality. So the hotels were down an average of 10%. That is based off, and I think this is important to let you know that is based off the fact that we don't have the 2020 income and expense numbers on these investment grade properties. We have the 2019. It takes almost 6 months to reconstruct those, but it's obvious that the risk of owning a property that's in that business, in the hospitality business, is high. May not be as high as it was 6 months ago. It may be. I mean, we don't know that, but I have increased the risk factor, which is the capitalization rate on what investors would expect if they were to buy a property like that. And we've assessed it up. We've raised it up. So if you raise your capitalization rate, then your value goes down. So what's going to happen next year probably is we're going to see those numbers where the income actually went down. Once they've submitted it to us, we'll assess the risk and see if it's going to be more, because there may be more to come on that end of it, on the hospitality side. We don't know. We just don't know what's going to happen. But I thought it'd be worth just that hitting you with that is that we lag behind. We cannot get the 20 statements. They haven't even finished them yet. So we're always lagging behind. And right now we're basing that off on some other property types too, is a higher capitalization rate. And we'll wait and we'll see what those income numbers look like in the coming year and see where we're at next year when we're at this time. So that's basically my report. And I'm sorry if it took too long, but I'll be glad to take any questions.
Tell you what, Ronald, this is very, very important stuff, and thank you for your diligent work. Okay, any questions or comments from council members?
Councilmember Tower, if you would pause 2 to 3 seconds, and then after Mr. Tower, it will be Councilmember Moss. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hager. Could we go back to slide 14, please?
I could hardly hear Council Member Tower.
Is that any better? Can you hear me? Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Slide 14. Okay, maybe it's 13 or 15. 14 is not what I was looking for. That's it. 13. Back to that numbers at the bottom. I got a little confused. You said you referred to those two numbers in bold type at the bottom. And then you said, when you were talking about last year, you talked about above and below 500,000. I don't know whether you meant to say 350. You said there was a 2/3 number. If you don't mind, would you just go over what your comments on those two numbers?
Yes, sir. And I'm sorry. Thank you for asking that question. What I said about the 44.1 below 350 and 55.9 above, that's correct. And what I said, I should have prefaced it though by saying, if you look at those and you look at 500,000, then you'll see 2/3 of
Right.
2/3 was stronger of it. So it's a higher percentage. And you're right. And I did not point that out, but that is what I meant.
Mr. Tower, did you have any additional questions or comments?
Or you were just commenting on this year's?
Tower, so if you'll ask all of your questions, and then I'll unmute Mr. Agnor. Thank you.
Question was there, did you make a reference to last year's numbers?
Mr. Agnor, if you'd like to respond, please.
No, sir. That was just adding up this year's in a little different way.
Mr. Tower, any additional questions or comments?
No, ma'am. Thank you.
Councilmember Moss, if you would pause 2 to 3 seconds. Thank you.
Well, City Real Estate Assessor Don, you and your staff have done an excellent job, and I've appreciated the conversations we have had leading up to this report. Mr. Mayor, there's a lot of insights here of fiscal policy discussions as we approach the budget, but I'm not going to get into those today, but those need to be had. But I'll try to go through all my questions and observations and then stop. I hope that often I'm sure many of you who have portfolios look at same store sales and then new store sales. It would be nice to see what the resale experience has been relative to what new homes are, but I would like to see the resale data that we have on the different categories of residential, the mean and median, and I know you have that. But I do appreciate you covering the fact that we will continue to see, more than likely continue to see reductions in the assessments for hospitality industry focused properties because of just the lag in reporting. But on slide, not for today, but for slide 13, it would be great if we could get that in constant dollars, would be super. Slide 13, and I know a number of the people on council have been there a number of times. Remember back in 1986, this is about where we were in terms of the break as we were trying to pursue a 70-30 strategy. So it would be interesting to know, Don, if when you control for hospitality industry and then take them out of the base, how does that percentage look? So we could get a better kind of normalized assessment of just how much of that decrement is really in that area of hotels. That would be, I think, insightful as we talk about the budget and about tax relief. On slide 10, the footnote says that for the commercial part of it, you didn't include the land, but it appears to me that footnote isn't on the residential. The residential includes both the structure and the land. If that's the case, confirm that. I'd like to see that be an apple-to-apple comparison, either take it out of both or put it into both so we can see what that is. That would be helpful. And I'm assuming that on slide 12, when it says new home, that new home refers to all types of residential that you had on earlier slides, condos, single family, all that stuff is in there, just to make sure I'm reading that correctly. It's interesting just to point out an observation, the place that the TIF that we spend the least amount of money on is valued the highest and generates the most net revenue. Sandbridge, just thought that would be an interesting observation. And Mr. Mayor, this is more for us as we look back towards, and I know it isn't here, I think it's in the book, but it lists all the individual properties that are tax exempt by council action. I think one of the issues I had last year getting sponsorship for that bill to broaden the base for how to pay for a bond referendum for stormwater was identifying what would be in the universe paying it versus what's not. So I hope when we get to that discussion, we can use that baseline in that document. But what I'm also hoping is that as we look to the fiscal policy implications, I'm realizing that the homes that cost the least, the most affordable, went up the most, and those are the people most financially stressed. We need to look to see, since we're outperforming the city manager's budget estimate by 0.7 cents, what's the best way to provide targeted relief, even if it's reducing another tax. And with that, that's the conclusion of my comments, Mrs. Barnes.
Okay, anyone else?
Any additional, Councilmember Tower, I see your virtual hand still, thank you. If there are any other questions from council members, please raise your virtual hand. Seeing none, Mayor, I'll turn the meeting back to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all very much, and thank you, Ron, for once again excellent work and very thoughtful presentation. Okay, Mr. City Manager, we're moving into managers' briefings.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, at this time, I'd like to make a brief announcement. The EMS fee for service presentation has been pulled off the agenda. We're going to start the presentation with Police Chief Newdigate. He's going to give an update on the 2020 comp stat report. Then followed by that will be Tom Nicholas from Public Works, a facilities engineer, to give you an update on the municipal center construction projects. At this time, go on ahead, Chief.
3 seconds before beginning. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council, thank you for this opportunity to come in and present the 2020 Part 1 crime review. Next slide, please. Just like to touch on, I'm sure everybody is quite aware, but Part 1 crime is composed of 2 categories, violent and property. These are the 8 offenses that we are typically assessed against other cities and comprise the big Part 1 that we send to the FBI as part of our NIBRS National Incident-Based Reporting System. Next slide, please. So when we talk about total Part 1, which is encompassed of both property and violent, you can see that we were down 13.2% total Part 1 crimes for 2020. This really plays out that when you look at the numbers, that 92% of the Part 1 index crimes that are occurring in the city of Virginia Beach are property crimes. So and I also like to bring your attention that not just the 13.2% reduction from last year, but we're also looking at a 28% decrease in total Part 1 over the 5 years. Next, please. This is just a quick breakdown of where we are by precinct in regards to total Part 1. As you can see, and this will be a recurring theme throughout the presentation, that 3rd precinct is going to take the lead in the total number of offenses when we look at our 4 precincts in comparison. Next slide. When we look at property crimes, next slide. There we go. Also down 13.6% with significant reductions in 2020 in the categories of theft from autos and other thefts. Next slide. Also mirroring total Part 1, a 28% reduction in property crime over the 5 year. Next, please. Almost the mirror image of the overall Part 1, that when we look at the property crimes by percentage, it is the 3rd, followed by the 4th, followed by 2nd precinct, followed by 1st precinct. Next, please. Okay, when we look at violent crime, and those are the categories of homicide, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault, we actually had a decrease of 7.6% for the year of 2020. Next. We also reflect a 24% decrease over the 5 year. The 1 point of reference where we did see a slight uptick, next please, is when we are looking, go back to that previous slide, please. Thank you. When we are looking at aggravated assaults, there was an uptick, 302 compared to 279 the preceding year, but I will draw your attention that it was still lower than the 321 offenses that we had in 2018. Next. Just the breakdown of violent crime by precinct, with the 3rd leading, 2nd and 4th are pretty much equal in their share of violent crime, and 1st precinct has a significantly reduced workload when it comes to violent crime offenses. Next. All right, I'd like to cover total shooting victimizations, and this is both fatal and non-fatal shooting victims for the year 2020. Next. Next. For the year, this is where we struggled as an organization and as a city. When we look at total shooting victimization, we were up 70%. So even though we had a significant reduction in the fatal victimization, 25 homicides, 25 shooting homicides in 2019 versus only 13 in 2020. Next, next, and next. As you can see, we went from 28 non-fatal shooting victims in 2019 to 77 in 2020. So unfortunately, we had a significant increase of 175% in non-fatal shooting victimization, which resulted in the overall 70% total increase. Next. Just a little breakdown on where how some of these shooting incidents were reflected. The vast majority, as you can see, are single victim incidents, but we did have 2 4-victim incidents and 5 3-victim incidents. Next. This is a breakdown by month. As you can see, the vast majority of the shooting victimization occurred in June and July. When we spiked in June, 10 or 50% of those 20 shooting victims did occur at the oceanfront. So we really struggled in June and July. We started to taper off, and then we had a bit of a spike in gun violence in November that I believe everyone remembers that I came in and presented the challenges and the circumstances that we experienced, and then we were able to regroup, and those numbers decreased back to what we would believe would be a normal range for us. Next. Okay, this is the rolling timeline. A couple things that I wanted to discuss, bring your attention to, that the gray line is the 3-year average. The yellow is the 2019 victim count, and the blue is the 2020 victim count. So a couple things I bring attention to back in March, where there was a change in police response, not just in Virginia Beach, but nationally, and how we operated. You know, the police really pulled back from the community because we were worried about the strength of our workforce being afflicted with COVID exposure. And so nationally, you will see a large uptick in shooting violence in other large cities in that time period from March to April. For whatever reason, in Virginia Beach, we were not afflicted with the same conditions. So we were very lucky that our violent crime and our shooting violence did not have the same national uptick that other large cities experienced during the onset of COVID. If we look at where we are with, if you look at the yellow and the uptick that we had in the June period, that of course is the Building 2 incident from 2019. And then when we look at the blue for the week of July 4th for 2020, that is right after the civil unrest that we had on May 31st of 20, and then it really spiked and it stayed above the average and well above where we were in 2019 for almost the rest of the year. And that's also reflected in the upcoming blue spike that we saw in November, well above the 3-year average, well above what we experienced in regards to shooting violence in 2019. Next slide, please. These are shooting victims by district. Unfortunately, you know, there is a little change there that the second and third are driving the overwhelming majority of our shooting violence, concentrated at the oceanfront and in the Western Bayside area is indicated with the animation on the screen. Next, please. Next, we will break down our homicides for the year. Next, please. Next. There was actually a 43% decrease in our homicides, but we do have to take into account that we did have the tragic Building 2 incident the preceding year. So I thought it was incredibly relevant for us to look not only at the year-over-year average, but look at what our 5-year average is, and that is 20.4. So we were actually 3 homicides under our yearly average for the last 5 years. Next, please. Just a breakdown of where those homicides are occurring in Virginia Beach. The 3rd had almost half of our homicidal violence, followed by 4th Precinct, and the map will reflect yellow will be our gun homicides, and the white triangles are means other than gun violence. Next, please. When we looked at the 17 homicides that we did have in Virginia Beach, 13 of those were committed by firearms, 1 by blunt force, 1 edged weapons, and 2 we still do not have a definitive cause of death. When we look at the age demographics, 16 of our victims were adults. We only had 1 juvenile adult homicide victim. In regards to suspects, 10 suspects were adults, but what I want to bring your attention to is of the suspects that we do have, 4 of those were juveniles in these 17 homicides. Next, please. When we look at the 2020 victim demographics, 11 of our victims were male Black, 2 were female Black, 1 male white, and 3 female whites. Next, please. These are our suspect demographics of the 14 homicides that have been cleared so far. 9 of the suspects were male Black, 3 male white suspects, 1 female white suspect, and 1 other. Next, please. The positive is that your homicide unit for Virginia Beach is doing a incredibly outstanding job of closing these homicides and bringing justice to the families. So the national average for closing a homicide, which is defined as arrest, death of the offender, or prosecution declined, and most of the times those are self-defense homicides, is 62.3%. We currently stand at 71%, well above the average. In 2019, we were closing 9 out of every 10 homicides that occurred in Virginia Beach. And I would expect that even though we are looking at a 71% closure currently, that number will only go up as your homicide detectives continue to diligently investigate the 3 cases that are unsolved. And I'm hopeful that we will bring some closure in some of those cases, and that number will go up higher than the 71% that we currently have. Next slide, please. Next. You can go through the animation, please, Chris. Just to bring your attention to how we are doing compared to the rest of the nation. It was a very turbulent year for law enforcement and especially violent crime. So we had a 43% reduction, but on average, the other major cities in North America, because when you look at Major City Chiefs Association, it is the 69 largest cities in North America. There was a 32% increase in homicide violence. So almost an additional 2,000 homicide victims in North America last year compared to 2019. Significant uptick, 15% in total aggravated assaults. We fared a little bit better as a city. Ours was only 8.2%, slightly above where we were the preceding year and much lower than the national average. Next, please. Next, please. I know Councilmember Abbott had asked about this at my prior presentation, so I wanted to pull these numbers for her. And I had heard this, and I think we had discussed it anecdotally all year that we believe because of COVID and the number of people staying at home that there would be a significant increase in the number of calls and arrests and interventions for domestic violence. It just did not play out in the numbers. There is actually a decrease, and a pretty significant decrease from the preceding year. Next, please. And this just shows you where we are in regards to domestic violence. And year over year since 2016, there has been a pretty significant decrease in the number of domestic violence calls here in the beach. Next, please. Just wanted to bring council's attention to a new product that we have implemented to really showcase our analytical part 1 efforts. So CompStat has really become what we call WAVES now. It is the weekly analysis for VBPD engagement and strategies. Next, please. So it is a report that will look at all of the 2 different part 1 crime categories, violent and property, on a 28, a 91, and a year-to-date comparison, as well as the 3-year average. So it's really that snapshot to help battle that perception that crime is on the increase versus what is really occurring within our city. This is now posted weekly on the police department's website. So, we have put it out social media, we put out a press release, we had some media representation to really get it out to the community that this data is now available for them to review on a weekly basis to really tell how well or how not so well we may be doing at a certain period and snapshot in time in regards to our major crime categories. So there will be a overall one as you're looking. This is a citywide, and then we break it down by precinct. So if we can go through the next 3 slides, please. First precinct, second precinct, third, and fourth. So a lot of good news coming out in regards to our crime numbers, with the exception of the increase in shooting violence, which, as I mentioned, we are retooling to get a specific focus on that I can elaborate on if there are questions. But the one area that I did want to bring attention to is our sworn staffing. Next slide, please. Virginia Beach Police Department is authorized 813 sworn positions. As we stand today, we only have 761 actual sworn officers, and that included, and I use past tense, it was the 40 that were in the recruit class. But right before we started this presentation, I was told that we lost a member today that decided that this profession was no longer for them. So we are now down to 39 in the academy. But say that we're still looking at that 761. Those recruits do not graduate until this July, and then they go into phase 2 of their training with a field training officer for several weeks. So they really can't be counted towards the complement until probably late this year. So if we're really looking at where we are operationally, we have 92 vacant positions in the PD currently, which is approximately 11% of our authorized strength. We are getting to a position now where we've had to take some measures to overcome the 92 positions. We have stopped, I've pretty much eliminated transfers to all the non-patrol related assignments. So our specialized assignments, as people retire or they get promoted, we are not currently backfilling unless they are extremely critical, because we do not want to take away from the street strength that we currently have. Also beginning to implement some mandatory overtime to backfill shifts to make sure that we have sufficient street strength out there to accommodate the calls for service for the citizens of Virginia Beach. And we're also taking a hard look about implementing a new shift strategy in the 1st and 4th precinct. I think council knows that we've been on 10-hour days for some time, but we're still running 3 shifts, which is really based around an 8-hour day model. In my opinion, it's not the most effective. It's not the most efficient. So we are strategizing to look at 2 12-hour shifts that still maintains the 10-hour day structure for our officers, but splits the starting time to make sure that we are putting our officers out there at the time when the data says that we really need them, which is in the evenings and on the weekends. The data says that's when they need to be. We know from experience that that is when our critical incidents are going to occur in the evenings, the night hours, and on the weekends. And what we're finding is that we're not really currently structured to have the necessary officers out at the times that we need them. There's a big officer safety component to it as well, that when these critical incidents are occurring, we need to make sure that there are sufficient officers out there to respond safely to these incidents. So we're looking at doing a test pilot in the 1st and the 4th, to go from a 3-shift to a 2-shift system based on the data, the critical incidents, the officer safety. It will shift some off days around. Currently, the way that we are structured in regards to off days is our most senior officers work Monday through Thursday, Tuesday through Friday, with dedicated off days and weekends off. If we go to this new system with 2 dedicated off day groups, We will look to balance those off days with a mixture of senior officers and our newer officers, because what we're finding is nights, weekends, when the critical incidents are occurring, it's our most junior officers out there that are working. And we'd really like to balance that, the seniority of our staff, veteran officers with our newer officers, to make sure that we have a very good mix out there at any given time. And I believe that is all I have. I know I've thrown a lot of information out at everyone, but I welcome questions. In regards to the staffing summary, I know PD&T just did a very comprehensive staffing study that I would be more than happy if the manager determines to come back and share with council. We are looking at some different options. I have them looking right now at what it would look like if we were to offer, recruiting and retention bonuses, and whether that's viable, that's something that would be supported by the administration and council, and whether it's been effective in other cities in staving off the slaughter of retirements that we've seen in Virginia Beach. And since I've been here since my first date of October 14th, we have had 33 retirements. So right now we've got to do something to fix the exodus from the department, because we are not going to be able to recruit and hire quick enough to replace those that are leaving this organization. I welcome any questions.
Thank you, Chief Noticate, for a very sobering and, just a great presentation. And once again, kudos to you and the men and women that serve us 24/7. Any council comments or questions?
Councilmember Abbott, if you would pause 2 to 3 seconds before beginning, and then Councilmember Moss will be next. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a staff request, and then I have a question for the chief. Amanda, if I could get a digital copy of the presentation, that would be great. I wanted to look a little more closely at it. But as far as my question for the chief goes, Chief, I'm wondering about the recruitment efforts. I know before you came on, we had some discussion about trying to look at best practices around the country and see if anybody was doing any kind of more unique methods for recruitment, particularly with recruitment of people of color and women, since I'm sure we're not the only municipality struggling there, but since we do have a less than ideal situation with our police force. So I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate on any progress that's been made there, and potentially maybe the council needs to have further discussion on the recruitment side of that. Obviously, retirement is a challenge for all city departments, and in that we're going through the cycle, so to speak. So I'm interested in your ideas on retention as well, but I'm mostly interested in recruitment. So thank you.
Councilmember Abbott, we will definitely get an electronic copy to you and to the members of council. Chief Newdigate, if you would pause 2 to 3 seconds before responding. Thank you.
To the council member, we are diligently drilling down into our recruiting efforts. We are seeing some initial promise with a very new digitalized recruiting strategy. We were very lucky that we received some grant money from the state to use for recruiting. And with that money, the manager has approved us purchasing the Salesforce software that is in use, I believe, throughout the city. Right now, our recruiting strategy is done on outdated Microsoft Access spreadsheets and pen and paper, and we really need to get into the 21st century. We are starting to see some initial advancements, but I think it's too early to tell whether that is going to be long-term, or is that just the result of some of the economic circumstances that we find ourselves in. And what I would say is we are more than willing to look at other agencies to see if they are doing it better. But my conversations with peer cities right now, even those that were doing it better, are suffering from the same set of circumstances that we are currently. To be quite blunt, there are not a lot of individuals out there, white, black, or brown, that are beating down the door to enter the law enforcement profession. It is the situation that we find ourselves in. That it's cyclical, it will change, but unfortunately, I think that we are going to struggle unless we come up with some really revolutionary and visionary strategies to make Virginia Beach stand out from all the other big cities that are competing for the same finite pool of candidates.
Councilmember Moss, if you would pause 2 to 3 seconds before beginning. Thank you.
First of all, I want to say thanks to all the men and women on the street who make those stats possible. I think it's nice to see that the statistics don't support often the rhetoric we hear from speakers at the podium about blood in the streets and high crime. But I would like to see a heat map or point maps on some of that other crime statistics you had earlier, Chief, that said first, second, and third precinct. But in the past, we've always seen those dots also for those other metrics. I would like to see that. So I'm hoping that when your budget comes forward, that to the extent that your data gives you some ideas about both strategy and short-term tactics to try to address that you would, even if they aren't within the baseline, that we would see what those are so that council can know what risk we're accepting and what's the art of the possible. I have enjoyed our conversations about the attrition issue, and I would like the manager to bring forth that discussion at the appropriate time, and maybe that is during the budget time, Mr. Mayor, and we could have time to have a real discussion on that. But I do think it's more, though I do support recruiting bonuses and incentive pay. I've been saying that for 3 or 4 years. And I've also been concerned about readiness fatigue in the force as we continue to try to maintain the security tempo, but with fewer and fewer people. And I think it's going to take a little bit more revolutionary change and maybe how I remember back, and I know Councilwoman Henley remembers, and probably Councilman Jones too, when we created Master Police Officer. I think there's some other things, and I've shared some thoughts with the chief as to things, but this is not the place, because that really needs to come up from them as that makes sense. But I think we are going to have to provide not only non-parity looks at our police department. I think parity is an obstacle to dealing with the things that we need to deal with, and that's not going to be an easy topic to address, but I think we can't get to a solution without addressing it. So we shouldn't walk away from a tough subject. But I appreciate all the analytical perspective the chief has brought. He told us he was going to do database decision-making and make changes based on data. He's kept that commitment, and I applaud him and the police officers that make it work. I don't have any direct questions, but I encourage the chief to continue to be innovative and bring the things, like I always say, don't be the most senior person to own the problem. Put the problem on council's plate, and then we can engage the public and decide what risk we can afford to take and what risk we need to mitigate, and we're just going to have to pay the bill and move on. Thank you.
Councilmember Wooten, if you would pause 2 to 3 seconds before beginning, and then after Councilmember Wooten will be Vice Mayor Wood.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chief Newdigate, and thank you for your presentation. I'd like to say I am certainly impressed by the WAVES program that you've implemented within the website for the police department. I think that's excellent, and it speaks to transparency, and I'm sure our community will certainly appreciate that. My question is related to human trafficking. I would like to see if you could provide me the stats for human trafficking for, I guess it would be 2020 at a later time. If you could provide me with that information, I'd just like to compare my data and stats from the information that I received in 2019 and previously. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Wood, and then after Vice Mayor Wood will be Councilmember Abbott.
Well, thank you, Chief. I appreciate your report here, and I guess I gathered from listening to other people, we did not get a copy of this. I can't find a copy of it in my package. So, but I would like to get a version of this. You talked a little bit about recruitment and retention ideas, and I recall prior to your arrival, we implemented the Career Development Plan, also known as the MPO Split Program, which ends up giving master police officers instead of 10% when they had MPO, it was, I believe, 5 and 5 or 5 and 6 or something like that. And I'm assuming that's still underway. I know there were several elements that we're going through, so I've got a number of questions. So I'll ask you the questions, and then I'll stand by. So the first set of questions is, the MPO Split Program, is that still underway, or the Career Development Program? I know there were additional elements that were in process that still needed to happen. I know there was some rotational shifts with officers and potentially with supervisors. There were also some uniform recognition things, whether it was insignia or something like that, that seemed important to at least some of the folks. So that's the first question. Second, you mentioned absent any innovative ideas or anything like that, it's going to be difficult to recruit. I'm curious if you have any innovative ideas for us or anything that you think that we ought to consider, or something that may be budgetary in nature that you can tell us right now. That would be the second question. And third question, I look at the authorized staffing of 813, realizing 761. I think in my entire time on council, there's been about like 2 weeks where we are full staffing. So, we seem to consistently be about, 80, 85 to 100 people down, throughout the whole process. But I'm wondering, based on that and the fact that number tends to always have significant vacancies, is 813 the right number for our authorized staffing based on our population and everything else? And of course, obviously based on your experience in Cincinnati. So I'll stand by for the answers. Thank you very much.
Chief Newdigate, if you would pause 2 to 3 seconds before responding. Thank you.
To the council member, yes, the PDP is still in place. I'm told that it is structured out. They hit top pay at 6 years. So that is keeping them here for that 6-year period. But we are starting to lose some folks beyond 6 years. And, they're getting into the 10 and 15-year mark and deciding that, unfortunately, this is not the career for them. So I definitely think there is room to revisit that. The millennial generation is a challenge. Many times we are finding that they are coming in. This is a job that they want to do, but it's not always looked at as a long-term profession. One of the things that I am hearing that when we are doing our recruiting, and one of the challenges that keeps some quality folks from coming here is the lack of a definitive structured pay plan, that they know where they are and what built-in increases in salary can be expected during their tenure. And whether the 813 is the adequate number, I would love to get there and find out. There are a lot of things that I would like to do to expand our community engagement. I would like to stand up dedicated community liaison squads in each of the precincts. We are moving away from a centralized community engagement model and putting those, it's actually one individual officer currently under the command of those precinct captains to engage in all the problem solving and community engagement initiatives for a precinct. I think everybody will agree with me that one officer is nowhere near enough. It really needs to be a definitive squad to really ramp up our community engagement efforts. But until we have sufficient staffing, it's going to be very hard for us to get there. Looking at it anecdotally, that's a number that I would like to attain, but asking my team, it has been a very long time since there has been a actual outside staffing study conducted of the Virginia Beach PD. I've done some initial inquiries internally to see if we can afford it in our budget. And I'm also looking at what that would look like to cost us to bring someone in. And it would be about $55,000 to $60,000 to bring someone in and take a hard look at where we are in regards to the number of officers that we need for a city our size, as well as how we're structured internally. And do we have enough, too many in Detective Bureau, Special Operations, to really get a handle on it? I'm looking at it. I have strong feelings about how to reconfigure, but it may be time to bring in an outside consultant to give us some independent, objective analysis of where we are and help guide and either affirm or refute some of my ideas and assessments in the short time that I've been here.
Councilmember Abbott, if you would pause 2 to 3 seconds, thank you.
Thank you. Chief, I just had a follow-up question and with respect to recruiting, and that is, have we done or do we have plans to in the future to do any kind of surveying of potential recruits or demographics of people we're trying to target for recruiting to see why or why not they would consider a position in law enforcement? I'm curious if we've tried to mine that data to its full potential so that we can figure out, okay, what are the objections to becoming a police officer, and of those objections, what are we able to overcome? Is it some kind of ancillary benefit? Is it, I mean, obviously, higher pay is always on the table, but I'm wondering what we have done and what we could potentially do to really try to zero in and find whatever that revolutionary strategy is based on why people are choosing to not pursue a career in law enforcement, whereas they might, join the military or become a firefighter or EMS. And I'm sure those are all very different types of people. But I'm just curious, how we can maybe target that to people of color and women, since those are, demographics of people we would like to see join the police force. So I don't mean to put you on the spot, and you can certainly get back to me on that, but I'd be curious as to see if we have done any surveying or if we plan to do so. Thank you.
Chief Newdigate, pause 2 to 3 seconds, thank you.
To the council member, we have changed up a little bit since I've been here. Our exit interviews that we're doing of retiring members that separate prior to retirement, recruits that we lose in the academy, I've tasked a sworn captain to do those specific interviews. So that, it was being done by HR, but I really want the police feel to get an understanding from these individuals why they're leaving, and especially the recruits. I absolutely understand the desire for this PD to mirror the demographics of our community. And we will try to identify some strategies to recruit more people of color. But right now we are just struggling to recruit qualified candidates to the police department, much less be able to be discerning to achieve those wanted demographic numbers. And the information that we are getting, and it is a limited data set because we really just revamped this model within the last 2 to 3 months. But the recruits of color that we have had, I believe we lost 3 to 4 out of the last academy that graduated in December. And they laid it right on the line for us that there was pushback from their community, there was pushback from their family, and there was pushback from their friends to be part of the law enforcement profession. And they decided that the scrutiny was not warranted. I mentioned that we lost a recruit today. I believe it was one of 2 Black females that we had in the class. So we've lost 50% of our Black female demographic that was in this current recruit class. And she just decided and told us that this profession was not for her, and she just did not want to be part of the recruit class moving forward. So we're going to struggle. there is a national narrative out there, and the folks in our community are not immune to this national police sentiment. And it is playing out in our recruiting, and it is playing out in our retention. And you mentioned pay. Pay is always going to come up, but on top of the pay issues is this national police sentiment, and it is making it very challenging for both recruiting and retention.
Councilmember Moss?
Yeah, I just wanted to, in response to Councilman Abbott's point, recently, I guess it was maybe a year ago, might have been 18 months ago, CNU did a big survey of why it is that we can't fill the 8,000 jobs that we could fill in the maritime industry and Hampton Roads. And it was for different reasons, but it's just that people, the young people, don't see that as, I'll call it status, attractive employment. Despite how well it pays, it's not where they want to see themselves as a trade or a welder or a pipe fitter. And so for different reasons. So I think in some of these cases, you know, it's you're combating that. So I think the national narrative in a different way is affecting our ability to go. But I think those are short-term environments. And I appreciate the fact that the chief has to, you know, look at the longer structural issues that we have to face over time. But I think also maybe we aren't marketing, maybe we could not marketing, sorry, we're conveying just the culture of the Virginia Beach as a place to work, you know, our generous leave policies and things that we have. But in the end, I just think you have to just keep hitting home. And often we know in the military, we would send the people that come out, did their first tour, would go out and do the recruiting. So sometimes it's the newest, youngest cops or patrol officers are your best recruiters. And maybe we're doing it because they're seeing the world through those same set of eyes and can explain why they chose to be and how they saw their future in the police department. So I'm sure that's all part of the strategy, but I do know that police officer isn't the only occupation that's running into where young people want to be versus where the jobs are, and despite the pay. So I just wanted to add that in there because that was a relatively recent survey of young people in Hampton Roads relative to the maritime job openings.
Any additional questions or comments from council members? If so, please raise your virtual hand. Seeing none, Mayor, I'll turn the meeting over to you. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Dehaney, I think we're moving on.
All right, Mr. Mayor and members of council, at this time, Tom Nicholas from the Public Works Department, the city's facilities engineer, will give an update on the municipal center projects.
Mr. Nicholas, if you would pause 2 to 3 seconds before beginning, thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor Dyer, Vice Mayor Wood, members of City Council, Mr. Duhaney, and guests. I am Tom Nicholas, the facilities engineer with the Department of Public Works, and it is my pleasure to be here today to talk to you once again about the construction of New City Hall and the renovation of buildings 1, 2, and 11. Next slide, please. I'll give you a quick program summary refresher of the relationship between the construction of New City Hall and buildings 1, 2, and 11. Then I'll dive into some details that will be of interest to you regarding New City Hall and buildings 1, 2, and 11. Next slide, please. So I wanted to open with this. You got to have a vision, and a lot of times a vision can create action and can create emotion. We are within striking distance of being able to have this aerial view be a reality here at the Municipal Center of Virginia Beach. At the center of the photo is the new City Hall, and I'll talk shortly about when that will be done. To the right is the renovated Building 2, and I want you to note that the entrance to that building is now on Flag Court, and the current building, the current City Hall to our left, will be renovated as well. So I'm proud of what this looks like, and I'm excited about the fact that we are literally within a few short years of this being like it should be. Next slide, please. So program sequencing, again, we were well on our way to designing and building a new city hall before we had the need to renovate building 2, 1, and 11. So the construction of new city hall will finish first. That's the darker box to the bottom of the graphic with the 1A on it. That will be followed by the renovation of building 2, and finally the renovations of building 1 and 11. Now, how does this work for as far as phasing? I'll get into details in a few later slides, but we will be finishing the construction of the new city hall this fall, in the fall of 21. We will then be moving occupants from the existing city hall into the new city hall in the late fall, winter, or early winter of 22. We will be starting the renovation of building 2 quite shortly. We actually issued the notice to proceed this past Friday. So that is not contingent upon the occupancy of the new city hall. However, as soon as the current city hall is empty and we move into the new one, then the contractor can begin to renovate building 1 or the existing city hall. When we finish the renovation of building 2, which will be in the summer of 2022, really just 16 months from now, we can then move the first police precinct and police admin from their current public safety building into the renovated building 2. And then the contractor will have the ability to commence with renovations of building 11. I haven't put completion dates for buildings 1 and 11. This is a design build contract, and we gave the contractor, the designer contractor, a lot of flexibility in when to start buildings 1 and 11 and when to finish them. We believe they will want to start demolition in building 1 as soon as it is empty, and then get going on that before they actually start on the public safety building. But if it's advantageous to them for cost or schedule to do buildings 1 and 11 at the same time, we've given them that opportunity. So until we get a little further into that contract, I won't know exactly what the end date will be for those 2 facilities. Next slide, please. So new city hall. This is the final rendering of what the new city hall will look like, and it's taking shape and starting to look a bit like that as we speak. Next slide, please. The project itself, you'll recall we completed the design in February of 2019. We put the construction contract advertisement solicitation out on the street in March and received proposals in April, and we're working on making an award shortly thereafter when we had our 31 May 2019 mass casualty event, which interrupted us a bit, but we still were able to make a contract award and issue a notice to proceed in July of 2019. Based on that, we have an estimated substantial completion of the fall of 2021, and we'll be opening this facility either in late fall or this early winter of 21-22. As far as funding is concerned, you were kind enough to give me $250,000 in a CIP to begin studying this in the summer of 2016. And then after that study and numerous briefings and discussions, we proceeded with a CIP for a total of $50 million to complete design and construct this facility. Next slide, please. Here's how this is playing out for us. When the CIP was authorized, we envisioned the numbers in the left column, a little over 5 million for design, around 36 million for construction, furnitures and fixture around 3 million, equipment at 1.7 and contingency at 4.3. The way it has played out for us is a slightly different, but still within budget. The design and study is coming in around 4.7 million, and there's not a lot of anticipated design dollars left to spend. Construction, we awarded the construction contract at $36,837,000, which wasn't far off from our estimate of several years before. And our change order rate is just 1.4% of the base contract. And so we have an accurate design that is playing out well, and we have an outstanding relationship with McKenzie Construction to get this done within budget. Our estimate for furnitures and fixture was a little high, but you'll see that our estimate for equipment was a little low from the way it's going to play out. Equipment consists of audio-visual, information technology, Linnell, which is our building security system, and other security features. There is a substantial amount of money in that $3 million increase for that stemmed from an assessment of the audio-visual, IT, Linnell, and security needs following our 31 May 2019 mass casualty event. The number doesn't concern me. We just, at the time we estimated that equipment, it wasn't as comprehensive as it turned out to be. So contingency, we have $698,000 left to round out the $50,250,000 left in the CIP. Next slide, please. Pending use of that, and not necessarily all of that, but there are some things that we have not yet negotiated that are pending change orders for this contract. The stormwater best management practice pond, which is on the east side of the structure, was meant to be a wet pond without a liner, and the geotechnical information just didn't play out the way we'd hoped, and so we're going to be putting a liner in that pond so it will hold water. We're rerouting some stormwater lines to the north side of the building through the flag court. I'm sure you will recall several weeks ago, we had a hot water break in the hot water distribution line from central plant to all the municipal center buildings, which caused us to lose heat. And that was caused during the placement of those stormwater lines. So we're going to reroute those and stay away from that so that that does not happen in the future should any maintenance be required. We have some variable air volume ductwork coordination deconfliction to do. And then there is still a, if we can afford it, a list of additional audiovisual, security, furnishings, IT equipment, and other contingencies that may come up. But the budget is tight, but at the same time, we're comfortable with where we are right now. Next slide, please. So key milestones. Actually, you've probably noticed if you've driven down George Mason Boulevard that the rooftop units have been on site in the parking lot to the southeast of Building 2 for a while. We're beginning to set those tomorrow. So the first of the air handling units, there's 8 total, will go up on the roof, and that'll be taking place over the next couple of days or week. April 2021, that's a big target for us. That's when we switch over to primary power. The switchgear will be here this week, and primary power, as you know, is critical to being able to condition the space, which is critical to being able to do our final interior completion. Brick veneer, I've gotten a number of questions from people about brick. Where is the brick? Just a refresher, it is veneer. The building is already insulated and the foam insulated is up, and so that brick veneer will be going on for a while until July. This was one area where we did experience a rather significant delay, and that brick was supposed to start to arrive on site late last summer, and the plant in Pennsylvania where the brick was being manufactured closed due to coronavirus. It stayed closed for a while, a couple of months. At the same time, when the plant reopened, there was a number of shipping challenges moving the brick from a plant that had been closed for a couple of months, all of their pent-up demand, and the shipping challenges due to coronavirus. And that pushed us into the weather of December, January, and early February. So overall, we lost about 3 months of project schedule due to the brick. That has since been, is now here, it's all going fine. But instead of finishing the project in the early summer, it's late summer, early fall. In August, we'll be doing the punch out, final details in all of the building with a substantial completion to happen in September. For those that don't know, substantial completion doesn't mean we're done and can move in. It means we've received certificate of occupancy from our permits and inspections staff in planning that allows the city as the owner to now move in as the occupant and start to place our furnishings, our audiovisual, our information technology equipment, and begin to be ready to then move clients or our tenants. Next slide, please. So move management. I have been meeting with a select move management team every month since March of last year. We have been focusing on how to move more than 300 people out of the existing city hall into the new city hall efficiently and effectively, tracking quite a number of 12-month, 6-month, 3-month milestones. And we are on schedule for a fall-winter move. Now you're wondering, why would I say fall-winter? It is quite likely, if we stay on schedule, which there's no reason to believe we won't, and we achieve beneficial occupancy in September, we'll be ready to move people and their personal possessions into the building in about the middle of November timeframe. And that always raises an interesting question. For some departments, that will be advantageous to move in the Thanksgiving to Christmas window because of low business volume, that type of thing. There will be others who, because of the number of people that generally are out during that window, may prefer to move in late or early January of 2022. So we'll be working with each of the constitutional officers and the departments and agencies in the building to identify when best to move. And fortunately, we don't have any extreme pressure forcing us out of the existing city hall. So we're going to make it comfortable and functional for all. Some notes on our facility or fixtures, facilities and equipment package and the audiovisual packages. We have been working with purchasing on these packages since October of 2020. So the city is buying these outside the construction contract and currently working to meet some of your objectives by breaking that package into lots to improve SWAM participation. Again, that's all going well, but it will not be one gigantic purchase of FF&E and audiovisual. We have an opportunity to make some headway with our SWAM participation in this project. People, I talked about that briefly. It's all about people, and it's all about what's convenient and most advantageous to the business operations at the city hall to move them at the appropriate time. And we will probably start several months from now, but well in advance of the move, meeting with each group individually to nail down specifically when it's best to move. And again, that move in completion will be in late 2021 or early 2022. Next slide, please. Okay, transitioning slightly. Again, this operations facilities renovation CIP was born in July of 2019, about 35 to 40 days after our 31 May 2019 mass casualty event, and turned into renovation of Building 2 to become the new home of the Virginia Beach Police Department 1st Precinct and Police Admin. The current City Hall will be the new home of Public Utilities and Planning. The Building 11, which is the Public Safety Building, will become the new home of Public Works and elements of IT. We were in a position to issue a request for qualifications in January of 2020, which enabled us to down select 5 design build teams that we wanted to pursue doing business with in February of 2020. We issued a request proposal to those 5 design build teams in April with the intent of receiving proposals in June. Because of the onset of the coronavirus pandemic and our concerns about budget and economic feasibility, the funding for this award was placed in reserve. We therefore extended the proposal due date from June until September 1st. Ended up getting proposals in September from 3 of the 5 firms that were qualified. We evaluated the proposals from those 3 firms, selected the firm that met the needs of the city of Virginia Beach the best, received permission from you in November to go ahead and take the funding out of reserve and proceed with award. And we awarded the contract and issued the notice to proceed to the design build team of Clark Nexon and Mideastern Builders on Friday the 19th, just this past Friday, which set the completion date for the renovation of Building 2. It's a 16-month performance period, and so contractually that building should be complete in late June, early July of 2022. The CIP was split funded. You appropriated / authorized to date $34 million, which enabled us to get through the planning process and award the contract for Building 2 renovation. The second portion of funding necessary to round out the $83 million requirement is $49 million in FY22 that is on the agenda to be discussed with during this year's budget presentations. Next slide, please. So before I get into details, it's fun to give you a sense of what the renovated Building 2 will look like. The interior building, I assure you, will be completely gutted and renovated. None of the floors, none of the stairwells, none of the interior structure remains, except for the decks. But the build out, it won't even closely resemble anything that was there previously. We are moving the entrance to the facility to the eastern face of this building. So if you were standing in Flag Court looking at the front of the building, the new City Hall is off to the left. This is the public entrance. There is a private employee entrance, which I'll get to in a bit. And as you enter, there is a 3-story atrium as you enter the building to bring a lot of light into the building. And you will certainly enjoy it when this is complete. Exterior, it's Georgian colonial. We're saving the structure. It looks pretty much the same from the outside, but the inside is completely different. Next slide, please. From the George Mason Boulevard side, or the south side, that's the new City Hall to the right, the edge of it. I just wanted to point out that we have removed the entrance to the building on the south side. So the new City Hall parking will have this grassy space, and there is a emergency exit and a small deck up next to the building, but that is no longer an entrance with a sidewalk or where anyone, employee or public, will be coming and going from that building. Next slide, please. From the west, looking at the building from the Virginia Beach City Public Schools admin building across the parking lot, you note that we have already put in a new parking lot there. That parking lot gets converted to controlled parking for the Virginia Beach Police Department, First Precinct, and admin for police cruisers and or their employees that will have controlled gate access. The structure to the right is the new Sally Port, so that those personnel that need to enter or leave the facility who are under the custody of a police officer will do so in more private circumstances than currently happens in the public safety building. And this entryway that you're looking at is the employee entrance to the building. So one of the main security features of all of our new buildings now is complete separation of the public from the employees and the individuals who do not necessarily need to meet with the public. Next slide, please. Okay, CIP summary. This actually, could you back up one slide, please? Okay, so go ahead, next slide, please. CIP summary. This one was a little harder to estimate. As you know, we put that $83 million requirement together in a pretty short amount of time in the June, early July timeframe. We were looking at about $7.5 million in design, $6 million in furniture and fixtures, 59 in construction, not including site work, and then $7.5 million for equipment and contingencies. Where we are today, this is not dollars spent, so this will change. But our design to date, which included program development, concept development, and schematics, was about $4.5 million. We haven't purchased or put contracts out for any furniture and fixtures yet, but we're thinking based on programmatics that it'll be about $7.5 million. Construction, I can't thank you enough for allowing us to receive proposals in the fall and proceed with award because the numbers we got were very favorable. We are awarding phase 1 of this construction for the building 2 construction number, which is $26,969,200. That is the design build cost for building 2. We have the option to award buildings 1 and 11 for those dollars. Those numbers are fixed, which leaves me with a much larger contingency than any for equipment and contingency we had anticipated. I assure you, I have no intent of spending $17 million on equipment and contingencies on these 3 buildings. I would say, though, at this time, because they are renovation projects that will have unknowns inside, that I'm not prepared to give you an exact number. But as this plays out, I will continue to work with the city manager, management services, and you to identify how much of that money can be returned to higher priority projects in the city. Next slide, please. So key milestones for buildings 1, 2, and 11. As I mentioned, we are in phase 1 as of last Friday for building 2 renovation. It's a 16-month design build duration. Some things will happen before that. You may recall that in the basement of building 2 is where the information technology department has their data center for the entire city. One of the first things that has to happen is the 3rd floor location of the new data center gets built out. We procure new data center equipment, install it, move data from the existing equipment to the new equipment, get it up and running, test it, cut it over, and that's going to happen in the summer and fall of this year, so that the data center that is in the basement of the building can be disabled and removed, and the contractor can continue to work with the demolition and construction of that floor. As you might imagine, we're keeping a data center open in a building that is undergoing significant renovation. We're We're going to have a lot of focus on this, and we're going to spend a lot of time working with the contractor and the designer and information technology to make sure this goes smoothly. Substantial completion will be in the summer of 2022, and we will move police admin and first precinct into that building in the fall. Now, phase 2, which is building 1 and 11 renovation. Again, each of those is a 13-month design, build, construction duration. They may be simultaneous, as I mentioned earlier, or they may be slightly sequenced. My guess is the Clark Nexon MEB team will desire to get into the existing city hall as soon as it is vacant and start that demolition, and then work sort of as they finish a segment of work in the old city hall. They will then move that crew over to building 11, the now vacant public safety building, and that'll be a staggered start and completion. I would expect we'll be completely done by the spring of 2024. And at that point, we will be able to say that we have returned public utilities, public works, planning, information technology back to the municipal center after the events which required them to relocate. Next slide, please. At this point, I'll be happy to take questions. I did include some additional slides in your package for the floor plans of Building 2. If anyone was concerned or interested in seeing how those laid out, I can refer to those in questions, or you may just enjoy having those for your own benefit. So, thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Nicholas?
Vice Mayor Wood, if you would pause 2 to 3 seconds, and then after Vice Mayor Wood, Councilmember Henley.
Oh, thank you, Tom. I appreciate the information. A couple of questions. I lost my WebEx connection, so I'm going to ask you 2 questions here. And so I don't know if I missed it. There was a building or a little pavilion that looks like it was out in front of Building 2. If you could tell me what the purpose of that was, and I apologize if you told everybody what it was when I was offline for a moment. Secondarily, you talked about, and that's the picture right there. Secondarily, you talked about the Building 1 with respect to having the ability to the existing Building 1 is still livable. I agree with that, but I also would disagree with that. As you famously told us, we are one bad incident away from that building being uninhabitable. And frankly, the council can't meet in the chambers now, or our conference room. And I will tell you, and speaking to virtually every member of council that I've spoken to, everybody feels like they're truly hampered by that our ability not to meet together and not to meet in the same building as the staff has hampered our ability to be effective. So I was not as much of a question as a statement. I think it's critically important to get the building finished as quickly as possible. And I know you're aware of that, and I appreciate you addressing the brick issue. So I guess the one item is just in way of a editorial comment, and the other was just if you could tell me what that little building is. Thank you.
Mr. Nicholas, if you'd pause 2 to 3 seconds, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. So the picture you're looking at, the small building to the right of your screen, is the Sally Port. So there is a drive that you can't see to the right of the parking lot where police cruisers can come in and pull into that to discharge people that they have apprehended and take them into the building. And so that it's not you won't be able to see that. And it's also weather protected. By the same token, if they're bringing people out of that building and there is a desire for some secrecy or privacy, they can be brought out through the Sally Port into a police cruiser or another vehicle and taken away from the building. They don't currently have that capability at the first precinct site at Building 11. Obviously, with regard to, we are working as hard as we can to get the new City Hall done as quickly as possible, and getting City Council into the new council chambers as quickly as possible is our highest priority. All I meant to infer was if there are some elements of staff that for some reason in late November, early December can't move because of personnel issues or something like that, we won't have 100% of the people moved in until possibly January. But the building will be up and running and functional. It just may not have all of the staff members from the current city hall into the new city hall. Then again, if no one has any issues, we'll plan on moving them as quickly as we can.
Councilmember Henley, if you'd pause 2 to 3 seconds, then after Ms. Henley will be Councilmember Moss. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholas. You have made a lot of people very happy, I think, by giving us some time frames to know where we're going to be going with all of this. It's been such a trial to have everybody spread around. I think we never appreciate what we have until we lose it. And the ability to have all of our folks working together at the municipal center is just worth so much to the city and the way we operate. And in missing that, I think we have all missed it so much, not only during the pandemic, but with the events before that, which caused everybody to be yanked from their places and put all over the city. It's been a trying time for everybody, but at least having some dates and some idea of just how things are going to come back together is just great. And I appreciate that so much, and all the work that you're doing to make all of this happen. Just as a question, I know that with the pandemic, we've had a lot of lessons learned and things that we know about now and are concerned about now that maybe we weren't as concerned about before. And I'm sure that our new buildings are going to be taking into consideration all of the air quality issues that we've learned about now. Do you want to address that, or could you address that somewhat? And thank you for all your work.
Mr. Nicholas, if you would pause 2 to 3 seconds, thank you.
So, air quality issues in the new city hall. The new city hall design and the uniform statewide building code that controls the requirement for the air handling system in New City Hall was the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers Standard 62.1. And it is a variable air volume rooftop system. So we have essentially 8 air handling units mounted on the roof that provide makeup air, fresh air from outside the building down into the building, and it's distributed to quite a number of smaller spaces with variable air volume control to provide conditioning in all of the spaces. Based on guidance from the state in the form of the documents that they put out with the Virginia Occupational Safety and Health Program, the infectious disease prevention of SARS, there was not a need to make a major change to that heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system. There are types of facilities such as hospitals, laboratories, places where people with infectious diseases are present, housed, and treated on a regular basis that do have to have additional features in their facility. So really all we've had to do to make sure we have the air quality we need is to re-examine our filter sizes and our ability to bring additional fresh air into the building, and the system we have is quite capable of doing that. So I'm not concerned. There were a number of questions that I get on a regular basis about whether or not buildings such as the new City Hall should have filtration that is capable of removing viruses from the air, and or other technologies such as ultraviolet C irradiation in the system. And I'll talk about that in 3 segments. First of all, what are these technologies? A coronavirus particle is approximately 0.12 micron in size. It's incredibly small. That's a millionth of a meter. And no normal air filter technology will take that out of the air. So in order to take it out of the air, you need high efficiency particulate air filter, which is a HEPA filter. And for an air handling unit the size of the new city hall, that's about a foot thick filter. And that would go into each of the air handling units. And as you might imagine, when you put a filter that size into a large air handling unit, there's a pretty big pressure differential between the feed side where it's sucking the air and the output side where it's providing the air. And you still have to maintain the same airflows in each space. So to put a filter of that size in, you'd need to upsize all of the air handling units. When you upsize air handling units, you're increasing the brake horsepower, which means upsizing the power requirement for the building and upsizing the emergency generators and things like that. We were too far along in the process of constructing the new city hall to put HEPA filtration into the air handling units without significant expense. The existing air handlers were already procured. We'd have been looking at about $2 million to purchase and install new air handling units. And that's without considering redesign of the electrical system and redesign of the backup power system, and then the delay in construction. So we did not pursue that. And as I mentioned before, the building code and the state occupational safety and health officials do not require that for this category building. The other technologies that we have looked at are the UVC. Again, the sun produces ultraviolet rays. About 10% of the light that comes from the sun is ultraviolet, and it's blocked out by our ozone layer, so it doesn't really reach us too often. But a particular frequency of that, the ultraviolet C radiation, kills everything. I mean, it kills any living thing, viruses, bacteria, and people. A number of years ago, the heating, ventilation, air conditioning industry started to utilize ultraviolet C radiation by focusing lights on the outside, I should say not the outside, the discharge side of air handling units where the coil sits. If you have a home air conditioning unit or you've been in a commercial one, you know that the coil is the place where when it contacts the air, the coil takes the warm air and pulls the heat out of it, but it also pulls the moisture out of it. And so the coils are quite often damp, cool, and great places for bacteria and other things to grow. By placing ultraviolet C lighting on the coil, it doesn't clean the coil, but it irradiates the germs. And so that technology has been common in hospitals and laboratories, again, places where the air that's coming through the system is constantly full of bacteria or viruses or particles that no one can afford to grow. That technology does not necessarily remove much in the way of viruses or bacteria from the circulating air. The few studies that have been done estimate that the circulating air, about 25% of viruses or bacteria is removed in a pass. And there's absolutely no data at this point on whether or not that technology makes it any healthier for people in the rooms to which the air is supplied or returned from. It does tell us that it's easier to keep growth from occurring on the coils, which of course would be hazardous in any situation. So we do not have ultraviolet C in the new city hall. We could put it in the new city hall. The cost to put it into all of the air handling units would be between $100,000 and $200,000, closer to $100,000. Or we could just put it in the air handling unit that supports things like the space where council meets, the council chambers. Now, should we do that? That's another question. So we could do it, but should we? Again, there is no requirement to do it for this category of building, either by code or by state guidance. We are currently meeting this need far less expensively with portable units. And I'll talk a little bit about that because you've seen some in the council chambers over in the convention center where you met. But we use $390,000 of CARES Act funding, and we have 314 portable units in the field that provide HEPA and UVC filtration in spaces. We have 137 more coming and 24 in storage. They're only a couple thousand apiece, and they are extremely effective for filtering viruses, bacteria, and killing viruses and bacteria in the air in smaller spaces because we can circulate air a lot faster. So we could make the decision to put ultraviolet C into certain portions of the new city hall. My recommendation is that we not do that. There's not a scientific or an engineering reason to do it. It also then begins to beg the question of, well, why did you do it if you don't have to do it? And what other facilities across our portfolio of 240 occupied buildings would also be demanding of such technology, and then the implications of having to provide that on a wide scale. I think that should be discussed. So that's a long answer to your question, but I wanted to make sure I covered what I know.
Councilmember Moss, if you would pause 2 to 3 seconds, thank you.
Well, I do believe all those things should be discussed, but they were never brought up to be discussed at a time when we could leverage that knowledge. So I do agree with that. Hopefully we'll take a different look on the other buildings, because I do believe when someone says what the minimum standard is, well, I'm sure if you're looking at it as the key governing operational building for the government, just maybe continuity of government may be a requirement that the minimum requirement didn't take into account. It's unfortunate that we were late to the game and don't have some of those options available. Portable units do work, but I think we have, if we think this virus outbreak we've had is the last thing we're going to experience in the life of that building, I think we're mistaken. And I think we ought to be looking into the future and not looking in the rearview mirror. But that aside, that's just a commentary that I think that we haven't done the due diligence we should have at the right time. But great presentation, like the fact you have a style. I wasn't aware until I saw it that we had a 3-story atrium in the current City Hall building. I would like to understand the business case analysis of that. I often hear from the public about our schools when they have these atriums that are architecturally drawn, but they're expensive, or they take away square footage. So I would like to understand the reasoning of that and how we decided that that was a public expense that merited it, because that certainly wasn't a discussion item that I can recall. But I'm more interested in that what is the governance and where does the city manager play when people make decisions to have design changes or changes in requirements or things that require the contingency fund to be drawn upon? How does that work? And who ultimately decides, and at what threshold does it go to the manager?
Mr. Nicholas, if you would pause 2 to 3 seconds before responding, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Moss. I certainly have taken a note that we will work with Clark Nexon to take a hard look at HEPA and UVC and the renovations of building 1 to 11. I will get you some information on the new City Hall atrium and the building 2 entryway, which also has an atrium, and to explain to you what the benefits of that are for the occupants of the building and why we decided to provide those features. As far as CIPs and contingency amounts, it is my understanding, and it's been the practice since I've been here for a little over 5 years, that when we approve a CIP, that CIP amount has a certain amount for design, a certain amount for construction, a certain amount for some ancillary features, and a certain amount for contingency, be it a road CIP or a bridge CIP or any one of our categories. And that's based on the uncertainty of the costs of construction of a building when we create the CIP. That funding, once it is authorized, is transferable between those categories. If design costs a little more than you thought, you can draw from the contingency, or if construction ends up being a little less, you're really working towards just getting the entire project done within the total authorized amount. For the most part, the decision as to how best to use the funds is at a project manager level. And that is for each contract that is awarded The funds for executing the design and construction of that contract are turned over to the project manager, and they're tasked with completing the entire project within the total CIP allotment. And if that takes all of the contingency amount, that's what it takes. If it takes less, then that information is brought up and visited with management services on where best it could be reallocated. That's the process that we currently have. Thank you.
Councilmember Moss, any additional questions? I see your virtual hand still raised.
Comment to the city manager. I've worked a lot of big projects and I've always experienced that there's a threshold of movement on contingencies that does require higher level management review. If this, especially the project that thinks they have too much contingency, I would suggest that the current policy, if that was accurately described, and I understand how the CIP process works, but the refreshing tutorial is always good. But I would think that there would be some kind of thresholds at which more senior look than the project manager would be required to draw upon the contingency fund. And I would ask you to take a look at that to see if that really is in the best fiduciary interest of the public. Thank you.
Councilman Ramos, this is Patrick responding to your question. Yeah, we are currently looking at that. I think right now we're working with the purchasing agent to set those appropriate thresholds of when certain change orders or changes to projects need to come to the city manager for review and consideration before the department moves forward. We definitely try to make sure we do not enter into the field where it's something that is for worker safety, but we are looking at that to figure out when it's appropriate to insert ourselves and at what dollar value.
Any additional questions or comments of council members? If so, please raise your virtual hand. Seeing none, Mayor, I'll turn the meeting back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, and Mr. Nicholas, that was once again a great presentation, and you know, there's a lot of moving parts that go with these type of projects. Okay, Mr. Duhaney, moving forward.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, at this time, Bobby Tahan, the planning director, will give a planning update for the items that's coming before your consideration at a future council meeting.
Mr. Tahan, if you would just pause 2 to 3 seconds before beginning, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager, Mayor, members of City Council. Kevin Kemp and I will be providing the glimpse for the March 2nd and March 16th items. Ms. Barnes, if you would mind to promote Mr. Kemp so he can do the first half, I would appreciate that.
You are unmuted if you would like to begin. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I guess I'm unmuted, and I will give the first half of the presentation. Those are the items on the March 2nd agenda, and they are 7 short-term rental items. These items actually, next slide, please. They encompass 5 council districts, and 6 of these 7 items were approved by or recommended for approval by staff and planning commission. 1 was recommended for approval by staff and denial by planning commission. And now I will go through those applications briefly. The first item is in the Centerville district. It is a single family home in a 10-home cul-de-sac off Kempsville Road. It's actually directly in front of Tallwood High School. It's an approximately 10,000 square foot lot zoned R7.5. Both planning staff and planning commission recommended approval. The home was constructed in 2005. It's 6 bedrooms, 6 parking spaces are required. The plan shows 2 of those parking spaces in the garage. 3 are in the driveway, actually 4 are in the driveway. 1 overhangs slightly into the right of way, but it doesn't block a sidewalk or street, so staff recommended approval of that. The applicant met with 7 of the neighbors on the cul-de-sac and obtained 6 signatures of support. This is in an area where not many short-term rentals are found. As you could see, I think there's only one other registered in this whole map. The property owner is agreeable to the occupancy of 2 per bedroom and 1 per week. The property is registered but has not been rented since the requirement of the conditional use permit was known. There's no zoning violations on the property. The second item is in the Bayside District. The applicant owns both units of this duplex dwelling, but the request is only for 1 unit. The property is located in the Chesapeake Beach area. It's a 5,000 square foot lot zoned R5R. Both staff and Planning Commission recommended approval. The duplex was constructed in 1993. Each of the units has 2 bedrooms. Therefore, 2 spaces are required. Both are provided in front of the home. The spaces hang slightly into the right-of-way, but do not block the sidewalk or the street, and therefore staff recommended approval of this. There were 3 letters of opposition that staff received. However, there were no speakers at Planning Commission. The property is not located in one of the proposed overlays. There are a lot of short-term rentals in the Chesapeake area or Chesapeake Beach area. However, most of them are to the east of Northampton Boulevard and closer to the water. As you can see by the map, there aren't many in the close vicinity of this application. The property owner is agreeable to occupancy of 2 per bedroom and 1 rental per week. The property is not registered and we have no zoning complaints on the property. The third application is in the Lynn Haven District. This request is for 1 unit of a duplex located in the north end community of Virginia Beach. The approximately 6,600 square foot parcel is zoned R5R. It is just east of Atlantic Avenue and 1 block from the Atlantic Ocean. Both planning staff and Planning Commission recommended approval of this item. The duplex was constructed in 1989. It is a 3-bedroom unit. All 3 parking spaces are provided in the driveway next to the home. Staff did receive 1 letter of opposition. There were no speakers at Planning Commission. It is located in one of the areas that is proposed as a short-term overlay that is being considered by Planning Commission. There are several other short-term rentals in the area, 15 other registered short-term rentals, 2 other CUPs, and 1 other is under consideration. The property owner is agreeable to the new conditions. The property is registered but has not been rented since the requirement for a CUP has been known, and there's no zoning complaints on the property. The 4th application is in the Beach District. The request is for a townhouse located in the Salt Marsh Point subdivision. It is a approximately 2,400 square foot parcel zoned A12. The planning staff and Planning Commission recommended approval of this item. The townhouse, constructed in 1984, has 2 bedrooms. Both of the parking spaces provided are located in front of the unit in the driveway. There were no letters of opposition or no speakers at Planning Commission. The property is not located in one of the short-term rental overlays, but it is in an area where there are other short-term rentals. There are 3 other short-term rentals registered in the neighborhood, and 1 other CUP has been approved. The property owner is agreeable to the new conditions of 2 per bedroom and 1 rental per week. The property is not registered or being rented at this time, and there are no complaints on the property. The 5th application is also in the Beach District. This request is for a single-family home located in the Old Beach District. This is on an approximately 8,400 square foot parcel zoned R5S. The planning staff recommended approval of this application. However, the Planning Commission recommended denial. The home was constructed in 2007. It is 4 bedrooms. 4 parking spaces are provided on the site, all located in the driveway next to the home. There were 4 letters of opposition that were received. There were also several letters of support. There was 1 speaker at the Planning Commission. The concerns that were raised were the number of short-term rentals in the neighborhood, the parking issues, noise, and overcrowding. The property is not located in one of the short-term rental overlay districts, however, is in an area where short-term rental use is prevalent. It is located on the west side of Baltic Avenue. If you can remember, when we did consider the Old Beach neighborhood as a short-term rental overlay, we looked at that divide of Baltic Avenue as the east being more appropriate than the west, and this is on the west side. There are approximately 75 registered short-term rentals in close proximity to this property. 21 conditional use permits have been approved. 10 more are under consideration. The property is not registered and not being rented at this point, and there are no complaints. The 6th application is also in the Beach District. This request is for 1 unit in a multifamily complex where you have a considerable number of applications that have come before you. This is a building that is zoned OR. It's built in 1969. Planning staff and Planning Commission has recommended approval. The subject unit has 2 bedrooms. 2 off-street parking spaces are required. 1 is on site, and 1, similar to all the other applications that have come before you, is being leased in the 9th Street Municipal Garage right across the street. 1 letter of concern was received by staff. There were no speakers at Planning Commission. The property is located in one of the proposed short-term rental overlay districts. It is located in the OR district, which is where short-term rental use is extremely common. There has actually been 4 conditional use permits approved in this complex, and there's 3 additional units under review. The property owner is agreeable to the new conditions. The property is registered but not currently being rented, and there are no zoning complaints on the property. The last short-term rental on this agenda is in the Princess Anne District. It is a request for a single-family home on a 15,000 square foot parcel zoned R15. Both planning staff and Planning Commission recommend approval of this item. The home was constructed in 2003 and has 4 bedrooms. 4 off-street parking spaces are provided. 2 spaces, they're all in the driveway. 2 spaces slightly overhang into the right-of-way, but they don't block the sidewalk or street. Therefore, staff was okay with this request. 8 letters of support were received and 1 letter of opposition. However, no one was present at Planning Commission to speak. The property is not located in an area where short-term rental is commonly found. As you can see by that map, there are no short-term rentals anywhere near it. The property owner is agreeable to the new conditions regarding occupancy and number of rentals. The property is registered, but for home sharing only. There is actually a note on the website. It is registered, which is Verbo, which says until approval is obtained from you, the City Council, that it would not, that it was only available for home sharing. There have been no zoning complaints on this property. And that wraps up the short-term rental items for that council agenda. Thank you, and I will stand by for any questions.
Any questions?
Any questions of council members? If so, please raise your virtual hand. Seeing none, Mayor, would you like for me to proceed to Mr. Tahan to finish up the presentation?
Yep.
Okay, Mr. Tahan, if you would just pause 2 to 3 seconds. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barnes. The items on the March 16th City Council agenda, 8 items are the regular planning items that were heard or were heard at the February Planning Commission hearing, with the 9th item being an item that had requested deferral previously at City Council. Next slide, please. The first regular planning item is by Gray Point Cove LLC in the Lynn Haven District at 3108 Little Haven Road and the adjacent western parcel for a subdivision variance to section 4.4B of the subdivision regulations. Staff recommends approval, and the Planning Commission on a 10-0 vote recommend approval as well. The subdivision variance is requesting to reconfigure an existing lot into two lots. There were 3 lots, there are 2 existing lots here, parcel G1A and parcel G1B, as you can see here in blue and orange. The applicant is requesting to subdivide parcel G1B into 2 parcels. As you can see on that bottom left-hand corner, there's a little cutout there that was a property that was given for, or that the city acquired for a city pump station that was in this neighborhood. If that property was not acquired for the pump station, the property would meet all the dimensional criteria laid out in the zoning ordinance for the R40 district and would be permitted to be subdivided by right. However, due to the cutout, they do not meet the required street line frontage in order to subdivide the property, which is why the applicant is requesting the subdivision variance. The next item is by Kenneth Stewart Proud in the Beach District at 228 Cavalier Drive. Staff recommends approval, and Planning Commission recommends approval for this expansion and change in a non-conforming use. The existing site is not zoned for duplexes, and it's an existing duplex at this time. The applicant is proposing to expand one of the units in the duplex towards what was commonly known as Cavalier Park, which is a linear park, and is approximately 50 feet, or is 50 feet wide. And the applicant is proposing to do this addition, and again, because this is a non-conforming duplex, they are required to get City Council approval. Typically, the required setback here for the proposed addition would be 20 feet. The applicant is proposing to encroach into that required setback due to the existing Cavalier Park parcel and being more than 50 feet from the actual Cavalier Drive city right-of-way. Staff is recommending approval, and Planning Commission is also recommending approval. The next item is by MS Virginia Beach LLC in the Lynn Haven District at 2257 Willow Oak Circle for a modification of proffers to an existing zoning, conditional rezoning. Staff is recommending approval, and Planning Commission on a 10-0 vote is also recommending approval. The existing apartment complex currently has 392 apartment units. The applicant is proposing to take the existing underutilized tennis courts, according to the applicant, and develop a building there with an additional 49 units that match the same massing and size as the existing units on the property. At the time of the creation of this, at the time of the conditional rezoning, the applicant had limited themselves to 392 units per acre. The applicant is requesting to modify that proffer to allow for the 49 additional units. The proposal was reviewed by the Bayfront Advisory Commission, and the Bayfront Advisory Commission finds that the proposal is consistent with the design guidelines for the Bayfront area. There are 7 letters of opposition and 1 letter of concern, and there was also a speaker that spoke in opposition at the Planning Commission hearing. The next item, item number 4, is by the First Chinese Baptist Church in the Beach District at 228 Pritchard Road for a modification of conditions to an existing religious use conditional use permit. Staff recommends approval, and Planning Commission on 10-0 vote is also recommending approval. The proposed modification is to handle an existing, to allow for the church to demolish their existing sanctuary and build a new sanctuary in its place. The proposed addition will be inside the boundaries of where the existing building lies. However, the existing building does encroach into some of the current required setbacks for the property. The applicant is proposing a deviation to the front yard setback due to their existing porch that encroaches, not the existing porch, I'm sorry, due to their proposed porch that encroaches. However, that encroachment, again, will be less than the existing building that is on site. There also are proposing additions or porches and exits or egress points that will encroach into the required side yard setbacks. However, the proposed building will not encroach into any of the required yards. These items that encroach into the setbacks are uncovered. The site does meet all the parking requirements, exceeding the parking spaces by 11 spaces. The next item is by Adonis Akinda in the Centerville District at 980 Avery Way for a conditional use permit for a family daycare home. Staff recommends approval, and the commission also recommends approval by 10-0 vote. The applicant is requesting to provide care for up to 12 children in the Woodbridge Point neighborhood. The applicant does have experience providing this care for children with 7 years of experience. And the typical hours of operation are from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Thursday. The next item is by Jessica Diaz-Johnson and Jennifer May Crump for a family daycare home in the Centerville District at 5150 Rugby Road. Staff recommends approval, and the Planning Commission also recommends approval. Similar to the previous application, this applicant is proposing to care for up to 12 children, and it is in a similar situated neighborhood. This applicant has over 20 years of experience caring for children, and their typical hours of operation are between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. Item number 7 is by Toya Smith in the Kimsville District at 701A South Military Highway for a conditional use permit for an assembly use. Staff recommends approval, and the Planning Commission on a 10-0 vote also recommends approval. The applicant is proposing to have a space that's available for rental for small gatherings. Based on the current occupant load, it is very limited on the size of on the number of guests that they can have, and it cannot exceed 30 people with occupancy. All events and activities will be held inside the buildings, with the hours of typical operations will be 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Thursday, 12 p.m. to 12 a.m. on Friday, and 8 a.m. to 12 a.m. Saturday through Sunday. Item number 8 is by North Legend Outfitters in Lynn Haven District at 1017 Dartford Mews for a conditional use permit for a home occupation for retail sales of firearms. Staff recommends approval, and the Planning Commission also recommends approval. Again, this conditional use permit is for retail sales, dealing with the sale of firearms and the related accessories. Sales will be completed online or by appointment only, and all packages that are delivered to the site require signature and aren't left on site in an unsecure manner. The number of hand-to-hand transactions will be limited to no more than 4 per month per the conditions provided. The applicant has, at their previous residence, had a conditional use permit for the same use for home occupation for the sale of firearms and related accessories with no incidents or zoning violations. There was 1 letter of support and 1 letter of opposition, and also 1 letter from the Civic League stating that they believe that the proposed retail sales from the home is not in compliance with their declaration of restrictions in the neighborhood. Last item was continued from your previous public hearing by its Expert Services LLC at 4937 Broad Street at the Bayside District. Staff recommends denial of the proposed car wash facility, while the Planning Commission on a 6-4 vote recommend approval. The proposal, again, the applicant requested for an extension, or I'm sorry, a deferral from the previous meeting in order to allow them to meet with the interested stakeholders in the neighborhood as well as the adjoining property owner. And with that, Kevin and I will stand by for any questions.
Okay, any questions for our magnificent planning staff?
Vice Mayor Wood, if you would pause 2 to 3 seconds, thank you.
Well, thank you. I don't know if it's a question for our magnificent planning staff or our magnificent city attorney, But going back to item number 8, if you could scroll back to that one, I was actually in a virtual Civic League meeting with that particular Civic League last week, and this item, this topic was brought up to me. They also sent me a copy of, I don't know, 20 pages or whatever of their declarations. And I guess my question is, everything else being equal, do we weigh in at all on that? I mean, I'm not an attorney, but looking at it, it was pretty clear that it's not permitted. So do we weigh in on that, or do we advise them, or what do we do? I mean, or do we have any obligation to consider that, or do we just pretend it doesn't exist? Thank you.
Vice Mayor Wood, historically, the city's position on deed restrictions or covenants in homeowners associations or civic leagues is that is a private matter between the civic league or the community and the individual property owner. Otherwise, the city of Virginia Beach puts itself into a position where it is interpreting a legal document where it is not a court. And so in making zoning decisions, we would typically not take into account or take any action based upon a deed restriction or covenant of that nature.
Vice Mayor Wood, did you have any additional questions or comments?
I just wanted to make sure that the planning staff, I'm sure the neighbors have told this applicant, but I just want to make sure the planning staff can at least tell the applicant the nature of the opposition so that he or she is aware of this. So at least we provide them a heads up, even if we're not going to consider it, which I perfectly understand why, but it just seems to me that they're going through a process that may not end well for them. And I just want to make sure that we provide them as much information as possible. Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments from council members? If so, please raise your virtual hand. Mayor, seeing that, I'll turn the meeting back to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we're going to move forward now with council discussion. And usually, I'd like to let the council folks, speak before I do. But once again, there is an item I would like to bring forward right now for discussion, and there is a bit of a time sensitivity on this. We all know that the Senate is discussing right now, and it has pushed till tomorrow the further discussion on the voting system situation that we have. And but that being said, in discussions with some council members and members of the delegation, there's a thought that if there is a way that we could, somehow, move forward, as I believe the direction that we were moving at the end of next year with the COVID and some of the complications in getting, a true item on for a referendum this past November. I would like to bring forward a letter that was composed without the benefit of our city attorney that I hopeful and will open up for discussion on, as to whether to send it. Just making a request that, it would be our intention that I think it's important that, given the different types of voting systems out there, that we find the right mission fit that would be for our city. And but actually to also engage our population who, as Mr. Moss always says, are our bosses. So I'm going to read a draft of a letter that was composed by myself and, and the vice mayor, but this letter is going to come from me, not officially, but I just want to, get the council's input, before I send it as a courtesy. So the honorable members of the Senate, Districts 6, 7, 8, and 14, Lieutenant Governor and Clerk of the Senate, via email for distribution. To the honorable members of the Senate, at today's special meeting of the Virginia Beach City Council, the majority of council members authorized me, this is only, with, the discussion and the direction from our council, me to inform you of the following. Number one, the City Council feels the citizens of Virginia Beach have the right to provide input on the form of city government in their city. And 2, the city council intends to place a referendum question on the upcoming November ballot seeking input of the citizens on the type of election system they prefer. Sincerely, Bobby Dyer. Once again, in draft form, open for discussion, and I welcome all comments and, perhaps a direction going forward. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Wood, if you would pause 2 to 3 seconds, and after Vice Mayor Wood, it will be Councilmember Wilson. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I have comments on this, but I think my hand was still up, but that's okay. I can respond. I think my hand was still up from the planning item. I completely agree with the mayor on this. I had the opportunity to speak to Senators Kiggins and DeSteph today a couple of times regarding this. I think it's fair to say that they think that the citizens should weigh in on this. And, I would tell you that we, when we talked about this previously in August of 2020, we had always talked about having more time on it. And I think we need to realize that in August 2020, the difference between then and now is early voting was starting in September. So there was about 30 days between when we would have this item and when it would hit when people would start voting. And I think we all know now, after watching the early voting returns, that council races and other races were changed based on day of voting versus early voting. So early voting absolutely is a major impact. So we didn't really have a whole lot of time for that. There were specific legal issues that we talked about that we probably can't talk about here, which is another reason. And then obviously the pandemic with absolutely no vaccine available at that time. The difference is now we've got plenty of time to create the question. I would suggest that we impose a deadline of April 15th for the question so that there's plenty of time to get this information out, keeping in mind that hopefully there will be a bond referendum question as well that we're going to equally have to get information out on. The other issue, another major difference is, at this point in time, as of today, 44 million people in the United States have had at least one shot of the vaccine, and 945,000 people in Virginia have had one shot. So I think we're facing a completely different situation here than we were back then. This is something that should be decided by our residents and not by folks in Richmond. And I truly think that this is something that we should move forward on. And I completely agree with the mayor. Thank you.
Councilmember Wilson, if you would pause 2 to 3 seconds, and after Ms. Wilson will be Councilmember Moss. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Bobby, thank you for putting this letter together. I think it's a very important thing for us to do. And I think it's really important for the voters to decide how they elect their representatives rather than the few people in Richmond. I mean, there's 141 people in Richmond who most of them don't live in our city, to decide how the citizens are going to vote. And we were seriously discussing this last August, but the timing was terrible. I was a candidate last fall, and it was hard to have forums or be able to really integrate with the voters and the public because of the pandemic. Plus, of course, there's the legal issues that Mr. Wood has talked about, which was not a good time while that was underway. So with the pandemic and early voting starting September 24th, the timing was just really terrible. But at that time, we had said we were going to look at it after the first of the year and try to figure out how to move forward with it. So I think I appreciate you doing that. We really need to let Richmond know, the General Assembly know that we take this seriously, and we're going to aggressively put together something to have the voters tell everyone how their elected officials. And it's not just us, it's also the school board. And I've talked to numerous school board members, and they were pretty upset about it because it affects them as well. So I think sometimes people forget that it's just city council, but it's also the school board. And they don't determine education by district. They all try to work together as a team. So anyway, I fully support it, and thank you, Bobby, for doing this.
Councilmember Moss, if you would pause 2 to 3 seconds, and after Mr. Moss will be Councilmember Berlucci. Thank you.
Concerned that two members of the council are not here, both Mr. Jones and Mr. Rouse, both who were on different views last August. I've never accepted the proposition that people need more education on how they want their council elected than they ever get on the candidates that they choose to elect. And if they're smart enough and we accept their votes for us, why do we think they're any poorer judge and need any more education to choose how they get people elected? So I've never accepted those arguments as being legitimate and have often just been a stall and delay commentary. That's my personal opinion. And I don't think that people need tons of education to understand how their system works. And because they vote for us and we have no problems accepting their judgment, I accept their judgment. So I am concerned about that. A timeline, I didn't hear that letter. I don't see the question. We had a question before, which has been on the ballot before, which we rejected as not being good enough. I mean, I didn't mind what was in the legislation. My comment in my letter, which I said was only from me and only represented me, was I did not take any exception to the content of the legislation itself, only that it needed to have an amendment to say that whatever comes out of that process should be subject to approval by referendum, which is slightly different from this letter, which is opposition to the legislation in total. I'm not opposed to the legislation in total. I'm only opposed to the fact that the legislation doesn't have a requirement that whatever comes out of that process before it could be implemented would be subject to approval by the voters. And we wouldn't have any part to do with that. There wouldn't be a question on the ballot. There just would be either you accept the process that we now have, or if they do, then they would reject that offer. And then we'd stick with what we've got. I'm not willing to my position say I'm not willing to support the letter. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, thank you, John.
Councilmember Berlucci, if you would pause 2 to 3 seconds, and then after Mr. Berlucci, Councilmember Abbott. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I regret that we find ourselves in this situation because, it's in my view that a decision as important as this should be made in Virginia Beach by the citizens of Virginia Beach. And it's true that it's well within their purview of the General Assembly to create a change like this. That doesn't mean that that's a best practice or an ideal scenario for our community. So I think it was stated very well by Vice Mayor Wood and Councilwoman Wilson, the reasons why having a referendum last November were problematic in my mind. There was very little public engagement, very little opportunity for discussion about such an important thing. But I just want you to know that you have my full support in sending that letter.
Councilmember Abbott, if you would, excuse me, pause 2 to 3 seconds before beginning, and then after Ms. Abbott will be Councilmember Wooten. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Mayor, for taking a lead here and drafting a letter with some suggestions. I've spoken with Delegate Fowler about her bill, and I've talked to some stakeholders in the community, and I've really had mixed feelings about everything that's transpired since that bill was introduced. But that said, personally, I think that it's going to pass, and I don't believe we should kid ourselves there. And I think that while a referendum is ideal, I think we should take it a step further and request that the Senate amend the bill to include a referendum requirement of us, but it be more in depth, and it suggest the various types of possible election systems that Virginia Beach can adopt. As we all know, there's more than one way to elect a public official, and I think it's clear to the delegation at the state level that they don't feel that we are going to act. And while I appreciate the request for a referendum, my personal position would be that we ask that they include that in the legislation, and that would make sure that we do a referendum, but we investigate all the possible types of ways to elect our local leaders up until the point where the bill would go into play for the next election cycle. We know that you could do a totally all at large system. You could do a district system. You could do a district system with super wards, or a district system with some at large seats. There's so many different things we could do. There's ranked choice voting. And I think we owe it to the public to not just have an up-down referendum where, we say, well, do you like what we have or do you not? I think we owe it to the public to say, hey, there is a world of options out there, and we should be investigating all of them. But from a practical standpoint, I do think that we are going to see a change, and I think Richmond is going to inflict that on us, whether we like it or not. So if anybody is open to that, I intend to send my own letter tonight, and with how I feel, as I've stated tonight. And I encourage my colleagues to do the same if they feel inclined to do so. But those are that's where I stand on this issue. Thank you.
Councilmember Wooten, if you would pause 2 to 3 seconds. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. First, I would like to certainly note that I appreciate the mayor having the discussion and bringing this before us as a body so that we can at least provide some feedback. Certainly sounds like you did listen to several of the council members who spoke out about the previous actions, and now you're certainly wanting to address this matter to get some feedback, and I appreciate that. However, my position has not changed. As it regards to the letter, I cannot say that I support the letter. If I do decide, I can send my own letter and voice my opinion regarding the matter, but it has not changed. And I would like to kind of echo what's already been said. Change is coming. And the unfortunate position is that we find ourselves as a body on the back end of the process. I do think that this matter could have been approached differently, and we could have been perhaps ahead of this whole process at several different times when it first came up. And so it's unfortunate that we find ourselves in this position. But now what we can do is we can prepare the public, and preparing them is going to, in fact, provide those options that are going to be available, provide the education, and also get their feedback as to how they want, this system to impact their the voting system that they're currently used to. So that's something that we can do. But I just think, at this point, we have had 2 referendums, one in 1994, one in 1996, that asked this question, posing it in a couple of ways. And so I think that, again, at this point, we have to now address where we are with citizens, be honest with them, and kind of proceed forward as to how the system is going to change. I think that's being, quite frankly, transparent and being honest at where we are. I think that's important. And so those are my comments. And again, if I decide to send a letter reflecting those comments, I shall do that on my own. Thank you.
Councilmember Tower, if you'd pause 2 to 3 seconds. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I fall in the category of those who would not support the letter simply because I don't think it reflects the will of most of the constituents. I understand that, yes, everyone would say, well, I'd much rather have it done at the local level, but I find the current voting system to be one that is not is unlikely to be acceptable. I don't think it's going to change things. I think we ought to get on with it. I think this would be the result. In any event, I'm perfectly happy to have a referendum about various voting methods, but I don't think we're going to change the desire of the General Assembly to pass a bill that conforms district voting in Virginia Beach to district voting in every other part of the state that I'm aware of, and indeed in every other part of the country that I'm aware of. So I'm not in support of the letter. I'm not terribly opposed to it, but I can't in good conscience support it either, because I think it sends a message that that I would not want to send at this point. I do think Councilman Moss's suggestion, if that were acceptable to a majority of council, to have it be subject to a referendum, I could support that.
Councilmember Henley, if you would pause 2 to 3 seconds, thank you.
I am in support of the mayor's position. I think it's very important. I think we have been asked if we had a position, and unfortunately we weren't asked before the legislation was introduced if we had a position, and so we are at the tail end because that was just foisted upon us. I thought we did a lot of very open, transparent discussion last summer about a possible referendum, and most folks who followed us, I think, probably understood that we had a lot of things that were difficult to deal with at that time and have a referendum on our voting system. And that's already been mentioned. Of course, the fact that we were in the middle of the legal case, which still has not been given to us. Also the pandemic, which meant that we couldn't meet with people in groups to discuss things, and the early voting and all of the other turmoil that we were in last summer. It was just not a time that we could have good discussion. And believe me, we do need good discussion about our voting system, because I went through it in the 90s. And I would like to just kind of remember and recall, for those of you who maybe were not as involved in the 90s, just how that did happen. At that time, in the early 90s, the city of Virginia Beach was functioning with 7 boroughs, the historical boroughs that were in place at the time when the city was created, from the original Princess Anne County boroughs and the borough added with the town of Virginia Beach. And after going through 20 years of very rapid growth, we found that the boroughs were very unequal in size. The Blackwater borough had about 1,000 people. The Kempsville borough had maybe 45,000. And so there was a lot of concern because the boroughs that we had at that time were very unequal in population. And so a lot of the point that was to be covered at that time was whether or not we should change those boroughs to equally populated districts. And that was the important part of the discussion. And then kind of thrown into that was whether or not they should be wards or whether they should be elected at large as they had been in the past. And so in May of 1994, there was the first referendum, but it was a 2-part question. And that question carried both issues, whether or not the boroughs should be redrawn to be equally populated districts, and also elected as wards. Now, I was not on the council at that time. I was reelected to the council in that election. So I went back on the council in July at the time when it was up to the council to try to implement that finding, because it was approved by a relatively slim margin. I think 52% of the people voted in favor of it. But when we got ready to say, how are we going to do this? Folks said, whoa, we thought we were just talking about equalizing the districts. We didn't know we were changing to a ward system, and we don't want that. And so we had a lot of discussion, and I can tell you, the people in Virginia Beach, they want to know what's going on, and they are very interested, and they want to know what's causing things and what are the effects. And so we had a lot of discussion about how we were going to implement the results of this referendum, which turned out to be pretty confusing. Well, of course, the General Assembly and the governor had to sign and to confirm what was going to be done. And our two senators at that time were of different parties. I believe one senator was Senator Stawley, and the other senator was Senator Clarence Holland, and one Democrat, one Republican. And they came to the same conclusion. It was too confusing, and the people needed to revote. But they kind of came up with a compromise, and I've been reading minutes and reading newspaper articles so that I could get this fresh in my mind. They came up with sort of a compromise. We would move forward and equalize the districts, but then we would have another referendum question which clearly spelled out whether or not we would have ward systems or whether or not we would have at-large voting. And that referendum was to occur in '96, in the May of '96 election. And so the districts were redrawn to be equally populated. The rural area was the big loser. We lost the Pungo seat, we lost the Blackwater seat, and those were combined in a very large Princess Anne district. That's why it's the size of Rhode Island. And then the Kempsville district was essentially divided into two. But anyway, as we have now, we equally populate the districts every 10 years with the census. And that would be coming up as soon as we get the census now. But then we went to the '96 election to determine whether or not this voting was going to be by wards or whether it was going to be at large. And it was a very robust discussion among the citizens. And the interesting thing is we had the folks who kind of headed each side were from the Civic League communities. We had Mr. Jackson, Maury Jackson, I think, that sort of led the wanting wards. And then we had a wonderful lady, Judy Connors, who stepped forward and said, we want at-large voting. So it wasn't a thing of the business community or anything. It was kind of both from leaders of the community who came out and vigorously led the debates and the discussion. And when that referendum was determined, the vote was almost 2-1 to keep the system that we had, at-large voting. It took 2 elections to make these changes, because in the '98 election, everybody had to stand for election. Half of them would be 4-year terms, half would be 2-year terms. And then, of course, they had to vote again. I believe, Mr. Moss, I think you had left the city at that time, so maybe you don't remember all of this discussion. But it was very vigorous. And this is not something that happens overnight. We don't just change our voting system and one day say, okay, we're going to change the voting system, and it happens. It's a very intense, very important, very detailed situation. And that's why we need to have plenty of time to talk about all of the options, to really let the public let us know what they want as their choice. And so therefore, I think this proposal that we come up with, looking at all of these options and determining what the question should be And then moving forward to let the people decide is important. Because if you don't let the people of Virginia Beach make the decision, it's not going to be anything that we're going to be able to resolve just by saying, oh, well, it's got to be done. We've heard from them once before, and I think we need to learn from our experiences. And I think the data is there if anybody would like to read it. This isn't something that can be done overnight, and it's not something that should be done casually, and it's not something that should be done without the public knowing full well what's going on.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Councilmember Moss, I see your virtual hand raised. Do you have additional comments?
Just have one to put things in historical perspective. When people win an election by 52% to 48, I've never seen some person say, you know, I don't think I'm going to take my seat. I don't think people really understand it. I wish we should do that over. So I think whether you win by one vote, 1%, in our country, the ballot box means something. But apparently it's okay if the General Assembly, two people decide that the public didn't get it right, and they decide we like that change, but when they give us another answer, we don't like it. I'm just saying you got to be consistent. Either the General Assembly can act to overturn the voters' will, which they did, obviously, because I remember when that happened, I was there then. It passed the House of Delegates when McClellan was there, and then the backroom deal in the Senate undermined what happened because the status quo didn't want to see the change. So we just need to be consistent about if it's okay for the General Assembly to do something back then to undermine what the public actually said. And I don't know how you interpret how people vote. I don't know anyone who's smart enough to know why they voted the way they did. I've never been that good. But it's clear to me where we're at. I would just ask that when this letter goes forward, because it looks like there's 5, I want to be known that 4 people didn't agree and that 2 council members were absent, so that we have full transparency on what that letter means and what standing it has. But I do recognize it's 5 people, it looks like, if I'm counting noses, think the letter's okay, 4 don't, and 2 are absent. All that's material information. This wasn't even on the agenda. But I understand emergent needs bring things out, but we're trying to respond. I'm just saying, I just want the letter to reflect where the council is on this issue. And a 5-4 with 2 people absent is very narrow, and the body needs to understand where the council lined up on that letter. Thank you.
Mayor, I see no additional virtual hands raised. I'll turn the meeting back to you.
Okay, once again, we're in a very tough situation. And, there's arguments on both sides. And I do concur with Ms. Henley that, I wish we had perhaps a little better opportunity early on to discuss this, and I certainly know where people are coming from. At this point, we do have a, majority, and I will say, that the members that were present at the meeting and that they encouraged the letter, but I will send it as myself. And I encourage the other folks, Mr. Moss, and I tell you what, I think you and Ms. Abbott have some, good things about, having them change the language to, include a referendum that would give us the definable thing. But given the time constraints and everything, I encourage anyone to send the letter forward. So I will be sending it as myself, and it's, let's get through this and, let's hopefully come up with a win-win situation. Thank you. Okay, any other council discussions at this point?
Councilmember Henley, your virtual hand is raised. I'm just wondering if it was raised from the last comment you had. Comments or questions? Additional virtual hands raised, Mayor. I'll turn the meeting to you.
Okay, that being done, we are adjourned. Thank you all. We will get through these tough times together. Thank you.